Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, it's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
Coming up this weekend, Marlon Vera is breaking through in a big way, and he's looking to add another legend to the mantelpiece. Coming up this weekend, of course, UFC San Diego. They're hitting up Pachanga. It's not just for Bellator. And as always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, respective socials, Matt Allen at Matt Allen FNP. Now, you look at it, I mean, we gave it the tropical vibes to the poster.
The Miami feel.
The people, well, it's San Diego, Matt. There's two different coasts.
It just, okay, it feels like a Miami Vice thumbnail, that's all.
I don't know about that, but I do know that it is a big-time weekend of fights. We have 13 scheduled for this weekend's card, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of a card because we have 3 additions to this one of fights that have been canceled either last week or in the past month. And when you do look at it overall, not a lot of ranked contenders, not a lot of ranked matchups, a lot of wild fights. And Matt, there's some of these matchups that we've been kind of covering on Dana White's Contender Series. Seems like they could have slotted over there, but they're on this Fight Night card. And nonetheless, you know that in those fights, they don't give them 50K performance bonuses. They dangle that contract over their heads, so then they perform. Well, that's what you're going to get on this weekend's card. And I'm very, very excited. Coming off a weekend where we ended up both going 7-3.
Not only that, though, we're coming off a weekend where there was 10 finishes and 10 fights. If you don't like MMA, what are you doing right now? Like, I had friends who barely watch the sport text me and be like, oh my goodness, does this normally happen? Like, normally there's a split decision, a unanimous decision.
It happened once, like, 7 years ago.
Exactly. We got nothing but knockouts and submissions last weekend, and hopefully they carry that trend of entertainment into this weekend, because we were talking quite a bit before we started filming, and even though there is a lack of ranked contenders on this card, a lot of fun fights from the top to the bottom. Like you said, we've already broken down a couple of them on past videos or past events, but I'm really excited for this Marlon Vera versus Dominic Cruz fight. It really reminds me, and I hope you'll appreciate this, does Marlon Vera's run not remind you of Kelvin Gastelum when he beat Tim Kennedy, Vitor Belfort, and Michael Bisping? Like, Marlon Vera right now feels like he's on a bit of a Legends-killing tour, and I love that storyline because, okay, if you beat Dominic Cruz, maybe it doesn't necessarily put you into a title shot. I would say it gets you pretty darn close, don't get me wrong, but you know what beating Dominic Cruz gets you? Another fight with Jose Aldo, and I think that's a fight that Marlon Vera would more than welcome. It was a pretty fun fight the first time they went around. I know Jose Aldo looked phenomenal. He showed his grappling a lot at the end, but still, Marlon Vera made a very good account of himself early in his career, and I think we can all agree he has grown exponentially since that performance, so I'm really excited for this weekend's main event.
Bantamweight's kind of in a weird spot. You've got Jose Aldo fighting Merab teasing a move down to 125, and then of course you have Cody Garbrandt taking on my guy, Ronnie Yaya.
And not to cut you off, but Frankie Edgar's all of a sudden kind of out of the division, so you are right, like 135, I think a lot of people, like the hardcores realize, pound for pound entertainment value, like this is the best division in the whole UFC. 155, 145, 170, like from 135 to welterweight's kind of the sweet spot for talent right now, if I do say so myself. But again, for Marlon Vera, if he beats an all-time great in Dominic Cruz, it puts him that much closer to a title shot. And on the flip side, Dominic Cruz tore his ACL 8 years ago. People thought he was done after that. Like, he came back, fought Takeo Mizugaki, looked really good in that performance. I'm sure I'm going to talk about more.
Then took even more time away?
Exactly. So it's been a lot of injuries for Dominic Cruz, and a lot of the times we talk about fighters, not necessarily as to how old they are, but how much damage they've taken. Dominic Cruz, even outside of the cage, has been through a lot, so I think this fight against Marlon Vera is going to bring out the best version of the Dominator.
We'll see how Dominic Cruz's figure 8 figures out at the start of this fight, but of course we throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen, and again, 13 fights to choose from. You're not wrong until Saturday night. Let us know who you have down below in the comments section in the Fight of the Night, because we're going to throw a couple at you that you probably weren't even thinking about.
Let us know down below in the comments section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
Alright, so coming up this weekend, Gabriel Benitez knows Fight of the Nights. Charlie Ontiveros knows, well, how to get his neck snapped by Kevin Holland at 185 pounds. And then how to fight Steve Garcia, lose in the second round. But oh, by the way, back it up. Hold on. First round, drops him with an axe kick, then drops him with a straight shot. For Ontiveros, this guy is the definition of killed or be killed. And that's what makes for a Fight of the Night. I look at his record, it's 11-8, it's bad. He's a giant guy to be fighting. at lightweight. Like, he is the poster child of, this guy definitely listened to a lot of Kid Rock in his formative years, so then he went with American Bad Boy as the nickname, not American Badass, because it had to be PG for the regional scene. And when you look at it for Gabriel Benitez, a guy who has cross-trained at some gyms, but is mainly focused at American Kickboxing Academy, you know how he slaps the base with the slap the leg kick and the kick to the body. Gabriel Benitez has one takedown in his UFC career. It's when he slammed Humberto Bandonai into a performance bonus. So, wild stuff for Benitez. I love his fights, and I love these Ontiveros fights because, listen, he loses against the better fighters, but he's always there to have fun. He's down to bang. He's a Julian Lane fighter, and I'm down for this fight.
At 10-8 and 22-10, you can kind of tell that these guys are action fighters.
Give him the extra win, 11-8. Give
11-8, exactly. But for Gabriel Benitez, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. Like, there's no fighter in the UFC that I like or dislike based on the personality or anything like that. Like, I enjoy watching fighters who I know are entertaining, and that's it. I love watching Gabriel Benitez, though. We always bring up the fact about how, he's got some of the hardest kicks at AKA and how good he is for that. He hasn't necessarily been the fighter that he was in his prime, but I think we all know he's going to have a very tough fight with anybody kind of on the peripheral of that top 15. If he does get a ranked opponent, it's probably a little bit too much for him, but Gabriel Benitez comes to bang, and like you said with Charlie Ontiveros, we have not seen the best version of him in the UFC, but that's why this is on the Fight of the Night screen. I really do think both these fighters are going to bring out the best versions of each other, and you know both guys need a win like there's no tomorrow, so I think this is perfect matchmaking.
I will let you bang. It should be a great fight nonetheless. And if we have a look at our second pick, Matt, again, this one's not too far outside of the bounds, and obviously 9 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. For David Onama, he fought Gabriel Benitez, and Benitez had him winking, blinking, and nod a little bit there, had him blinking it out until Onama was able to finish it. For Nate Landwehr, you look at it, I mean, the UFC record's kind of all over the place. He has that crazy performance bonus. His last time out against Ludwig Klein, a win that just shines like the North Star. But if you look at it for Landwehr, a couple of bookings have fallen out. Lerone Murphy and then one against Zubaira Tukhugov. He gets his call against David Onama, a guy who I thought he was robbed for Fight of the Night when he took on Mason Jones. I thought that was an amazing fight, but just consider that to his last performances. The win over Garrett Armfield in the rematch about a month ago. His other win that he has in the UFC. I mean, these two guys are down to bang. And I know Bisping was talking about it, and I actually listened to the fight with the commentary on. Normally I mute it, but I listened to Landwehr versus Klein, and Bisping's like, man, Landwehr's got to not brawl. He's got to not get into these brawls. No, Bisping, that gives us Fight of the Night. So I think that's going to deliver in this matchup, and I think this one's going to be a great fight. I'm glad it's sitting in or around the co-main event slot.
I agree, because these guys deserve more promotion than they've ever got in the UFC, and I know Nate Landwehr's not the best fighter of all time. He might not even ever be a ranked fighter, for being completely honest, but has he ever given you a reason to walk away from your TV while he's making his walk to the cage? Never! He's one of the most exciting fighters pound for pound in the UFC. And for David Onama, he's like a really fancy restaurant that only gives you a small portion. Like, I really like what I'm getting out of them. I just wish I could get a little bit more so I could really believe in this place more, because I do think David Onama has that ranked contendership in his future. I really do think that's the type of fighter he could be. But the problem is, I need to see a little bit more against some better fighters. In this fight against Nate Landwehr, we all know how Landwehr comes to brawl. He's going to make it a tough fight, win, lose, or draw. So I think we're going to learn a lot about both guys and their overall ceilings in this co-main.
The UFC hasn't been to Montreal since Demetrius Johnson was a champion. They just don't show any interest there.
Too.
But if they do, and David Onama's on the card, we got to do a sit-down interview with him at Club Chasse Pache in Old Montreal. I mean, that's just got to be the way to do it. The small portions, the crazy food. David Onama is the guy that delivers. So you let us know down below what your possible fight of the night is. Obviously, the main event at bantamweight, Marlon Vera, Dominic Cruz is going to be a good one. We were kind of thinking Ode Osbourne, Tyson Nam is like a close 1A, 1B, 1BC.
And I feel like we've talked a lot about Gerald Meerschaert's fight too. Like, just sort of on the private, off the record. We've talked a lot about that. Reminds me a lot of his Makhmud Muradov matchup against Bruno Silva. Again, we all know how dangerous those opponents are, but Gerald Meerschaert's the type of guy where the second you stop believing in him, he pulls some crazy submission out of his hat. So I think that's going to be an incredible fight.
Should be a great fight night card. Comment below with those fight of the night picks. So just to make it clear, there are 3 transplanted fights on this card. Ariane Lipski taking on Priscila Cachoeira. That was due last week at 125 pounds. Lipski's camp kind of talked about the fact that she had COVID during camp. She had medication to clear fluid from her lungs. That might have affected her weight cut. Might have, because she did miss weight last week. This fight's now bantamweight, so keep that one in mind against Priscila Cachoeira. Josh Quinlan, Jason Witt. There were some Nevada State Athletic Commission issues. Well, this fight's now in California.
Not a USADA issue, though.
That's what I said. Yeah, Nevada Athletic Commission. USADA a little bit, but anyway, it's going to be in California. A la John Jones, Alexander Gustafsson, we're moving the pay-per-view, so this fight is now in California, and Nina Nunes was supposed to take on Cynthia Calvillo some time ago. The fight was booked off or moved due to illness from Nunes. Now it's going to be on this weekend's card. So 3 transplanted fights. The ranked fighters on this card, Matt, there's not a lot of them. Marlon Vera, Dominic Cruz. You get Angela Hill, she's still ranked at strawweight.
That's
and
a tough one, though.
Calvillo and Nunes are both ranked. And then we have a lot of debuts. So we have Damon Blackshear coming in, making his UFC debut on short notice to take on a guy who I really like in Youssef Zalal. You also have, now this one's going to be difficult, you have Yasmin Lucindo. She's going to be making her UFC debut on short notice, taking on, now on the Combate broadcast, they said her name 3 different ways. So I'm going to say Yasmin, and then it gets really, really tricky. So if you're really a stickler for the language,
Yasmin
it is Horegi. Yasmin Horegi. That's the way I'm going to go with it. You could go with Jasmine or Jasmine Horegi. That's a big-time fun fight. A couple of fighters that are below 25 making their debut at strawweight. So a lot of fun fights, Matt. The second time out for Azamat Murzakanov.
Doing him no favors, though, in that matchup, huh?
No, taking on Devin Clark, former RFA champ guy that's been in the UFC for a very long time. This is a fully loaded card. If you're an MMA fan, there's going to be something for you. And I should say, one more debut. You have Martin Buday, a guy who was able to beat Chris Barnett by technical decision his last time out in his debut, taking on Lukasz Brzeski. So there's so many different fighters on this card, so many different backgrounds, nationalities, different disciplines. There's so much to look forward to. I think this is going to be one of those cards that goes down as a fun one.
Put on your seatbelts, guys, because we're going to have a fun time. And I can't believe I'm about to say this, but as we always say, Craig, let's get into it.
Coming up this weekend, a matchup at welterweight that was booked and rebooked. Supposed to be on last weekend's UFC Fight Night. Santos versus Hill. We have Jason Witt. Listen, there's 2 vanilla gorillas in the UFC. Should they fight for the title of the nickname? Maybe will remain to be seen, because I'd like to see the heavyweight Chase Sherman fight Jason Witt. I mean, Chase Sherman struggles with wrestlers. Jason Witt struggles with his chin. Now, in this matchup coming up this weekend, it's Witt versus the Maverick Joshua Quinlan. And for Josh Quinlan, these guys both made weight last week, and that should be said. I mean, they took to the scales on Friday. Quinlan weighed 169, Witt weighed 170. That's great, that's good, that's awesome. Now, bear in mind that Joshua Quinlan won on Dana White's Contender Series. He won impressively. He took on a short notice opponent, and we're going to talk a lot about this matchup. We're going to throw it on back to the prediction that we had last week. But I want to preface the video by saying that the reason why Josh Quinlan had a long layoff was due to a 9-month suspension from the Nevada Athletic Commission due to drostanolone. And then the fight was made, the fight was rehashed and gone over late Friday, and this is a quotable that I had found from an MMA fighting article. UFC was notified by USADA of a recent urine sample from Josh Quinlan indicated the presence of a small amount of M3 metabolite dihydrochloromethyltestosterone, DHMCT. Wow, one take Tony. While not a violation under UFC anti-doping program rules, NSAC, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, has ruled that Quinlan is not cleared to fight. As a result, his bout against Jason Witt has been canceled from tonight's event. So they moved it from Vegas a week ago when both guys already made weight. Now they're going to have to make weight a week later in California. With that in mind, we'll throw it on back to the original prediction video, update the odds, and give you some final thoughts, because this is a bit of an odd situation. And in this matchup for Jason Witt, he's on a little bit of one of those Charles Rosa, Random Marcos type of, runs. And you hate to see it, but alternating wins and losses throughout his UFC career, comes in on a day's notice to take on Takashi Sato, and promptly tries to go for a takedown and gets knocked out off of that in under a minute. So it has been a little bit of a wild ride. Obviously, his best career win, the big time one. It was a fight of the night over Brian Barberena. He also has a win where he absolutely grounded Cole Williams. The other losses on his record, 1-2, it's a tricky one. I mean, he's taken on Matt Semmelsberg. He gets knocked down in, 20 seconds?
Yeah, it was
less
tough.
than 20 seconds. Loses to Phil Rowe, where he has good success in the first round, and ultimately Rowe finds his Goldilocks zone and his comfort in the second. But for Jason Witt, it's kind of been so-so. Now, obviously, he's coached by now championship caliber coach James Krause, a guy who said on the MMA Hour that you're probably not going to see him fight again.
He retired today. Congrats to James Krause.
Yeah, he is a full-time coach, but he has Brandon Moreno in the stable of stars. Yes, they can hit. So for Jason Witt, a good opportunity coming up against Josh Quinlan, a guy who has looked like a banshee, a man possessed, a great undercard fight that we do have on this one, but he got the win on Dana White's Contender Series against Logan Urban, week 2 of last year. Finished him very, very quickly. For Quinlan, a great level of competition on the way up. Wins over with LFA, Dallas Jennings, Joe Borshig. He gets a win over Pete Keepers, one where, listen, was Pete making his pro debut? Yes. Did Pete get put on baby deer legs in the second round of that fight and just completely grounded out? Yes, he did. But for Josh Quinlan, an absolutely fun fighter to watch. A lot of finishes throughout his overall record. Really high, not Thai stance, really high boxing stance. And he throws great combinations. All the power in the world in every single one of his shots that you love to see. Now, Matt, I got to say this because the win on Contender Series, it was great. It was then overturned. Dana White was very, very excited about that one. But yeah, that one overturned due to Drostanolone by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He's had a long time off from that until this fight, but a good opportunity against a guy who has 5 UFC fights under his belt.
It definitely is, but I gotta be honest, Jason Witt's like a +2 to 1 underdog just about. It's like, that's a dangerous UFC debut for anybody. If I was making my UFC debut, I would want to fight a guy like Jason Witt who has a good wrestling background. Now, I know we all know what the obvious weaknesses are with Jason Witt's game. He has decent power on his hands, let's acknowledge that first of all. Is he the most durable guy in the world? Not necessarily. But still, when you look at his positives, I do think that's a difficult fight for anybody to make in their debut because he offers very obvious challenges, and it means that you as the prospect not only have to show a skill set to be able to deal with those challenges, you're going to have to be able to think the game too, because if you just go in there and try to fight Jason Witt in his fight, throw some boxing combinations with him, try to defend a few of his takedowns, that's when he's going to seem a lot better than he probably is, and that's the weird thing about Jason Witt. He reminds me of like a Yuta Watanabe for the Raptors. If he just comes out, hits like 5 threes, and then he won't play a game for like 4 straight weeks because he really isn't that good. Jason Witt, in some of his fights, when he is able to put his whole skill set together, looks like a pretty competent fighter. He can mix his wrestling in with his boxing to a high level. But the problem is, and like you said in the Tekashi fight, it really showed his ugly head, he's not good at defending himself when he does go for these initial takedown attempts. I know people are probably rolling their eyes right now because I always bring up this one fighter because he's so good at it. Marvin Vettori is who everyone should watch if they are a pressure-oriented wrestler who does try to strike with volume. And I understand Witt's a little bit more power-oriented, but you get the idea. Witt's big weakness is that when he does go for those takedowns like you showed, he looks like a mummy in Scooby-Doo. He's walking out there with 2 arms as far out as he can, and a striker like Josh Quinlan can sure as heck put him down with one big shot. The real question is, how long does it take for Quinlan to be able to set up that one big punch? Because let's say Josh Quinlan is on the receiving end of some takedowns, he's having to get up, he's using some of that energy, then maybe we could see Jason Witt start to get stronger as this fight goes on. It's just in every Witt fight, like normally you worry about a fighter's durability in the second and the third round. You know, they've eaten some big shots, how are they going to look later on in the fight? I'm as concerned about Jason Witt as I am from the first punch thrown in this fight to the last punch thrown, and that's why it's so hard to make any Jason Witt pick confidently.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Witt, if you want, like, some actual tangible numbers on this one, Jason Witt is 10th all-time in UFC history. All time. Like, think of all the fighters that have been in the UFC. Jason Witt's number 10 out of all of them in top percentage at 49.8%. He's at welterweight, the 3rd all-time at control time percentage with 56.28%. He goes for a ton of takedowns. He holds you down. He grounds you out. And if you want fights like that, the start of the Phil Rowe fight, the Cole Williams fight, where he just absolutely mollywopped him. Like, he is very good at getting his arms around you, locking the hands, getting the double leg, getting the single leg, freestyle wrestling base. When you look at Josh Quinlan, the things that I like about him, again, high boxing stance, good at throwing combinations, good at mixing in his power, good to know when to go to the body. And the things that I kind of picked up on, he's from Kauai in Hawaii, and you look at it for Josh Quinlan, he was a soccer star at Waianae, so you like to see that as he was a kid growing up playing soccer. But you see that out of Quinlan where he does throw these power shots on the feet, but he's smart at when he mixes them in. He does eat a little bit of damage in his fights. He will go give one to take one, but he himself has a pretty darn good chin. But what I like out of it is, first round, second round, as the fight goes on, he's pretty much the same guy throughout, and I love to see that in his fights. Now, he can get tagged, and he does tend to drop his hands a little bit, but I like the fact that he can throw a little bit of a different look from that southpaw stance, and he is a really fun prospect to watch. Now, I look at some guys when they're 6-0, 5-0, like coming in this week, and now you're probably watching this, it's going to be after Dana White's Contender Series, but we have a couple of 5-0 fighters taking each other on. And I look at them as maybe they're not ready for the UFC. I look at Josh Quinlan as a guy that's probably ready for the UFC.
He probably is, but again, Jason Witt's going to be a big test for him in his debut because Witt has some very obvious strengths, some very obvious weaknesses. What I hope for this fight is that we don't see a Josh Quinlan win in the first 30 seconds, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Like, I am going to predict him to win this fight. I'll get that out of the way right now, but still, I want to see this fight go into the second round, the third round. See him weighing a few shots on Jason Witt, maybe get taken down a couple times, really test his gas tank and test some of his wrestling, just to see where he does fall into the whole division and where his ceiling potentially could be. Because a win over Jason Witt, it might not set you up for the biggest fights in the future, but you're not going to be fighting other fighters coming off Contender Series or anything like that if you're Quinlan. So let's say he knocks out Jason Witt in the first round. A name that you had brought up earlier on in the show was a Nico Price. Like, Nico Price hasn't looked great for a while, if we're being honest. He has a big name because we all love him for the crazy fights. Like, I think a type of fight like that is someone Josh Quinlan could go in there with and have a really fun fight with.
To me, I'd like to see the rematch of, or at least the rebooking of what was supposed to take place on Dana White's Contender Series last year. Because as I had mentioned, Josh Quinlan was supposed to take on somebody. That somebody was Darian Weeks. Weeks out, Logan Urban in. He knocks out Urban in 48 seconds. And off of that episode, Chad Ann-Helliger gets signed. CJ Vergara gets signed. Simon Oliveira gets signed. Chidi Njokuani. And in the main event, Josh Quinlan gets signed. All right, so Witt made weight. Quinlan made weight. The odds in this fight, I mean, Quinlan is a pretty big favorite. Minus 250. Witt, a plus 210 underdog. We know the particulars. Witt is a wrestler to the nth degree. But the thing that I really like out of Jason Witt, once he gets you down in the mat, he's not just content with holding on to position.
Makes it count for sure.
Really good ground and pound. He's got good submission as well. Not necessarily just wrestler submissions, but yeah, head and arm chokes. That's pretty much his specialty. He's like Sarah McMahon, but he actually has ground and pound. But I do like this matchup. It just, now it scares me due to the fact that they both have to cut weight. You saw Quinlan, the team, James Krause, they were walking back into the airport on the Instagram stories, and James Krause seemed pretty pissed off because he's championship level coach James Krause now, and he's got a lot of fighters that are on this card or have trained with him in Vegas the last couple of weeks getting ready for Contender Series and for UFC fights. I think this is a fun matchup. My pick doesn't necessarily switch. It's just an odd situation because now Quinlan's in that John Jones boat where we've had to go from Vegas to California.
Just because you brought up about James Krause, I gotta say this. You will not find a person happier for James Krause than your boy right here. And you wanna know why? There's nothing sadder than watching MMA and finding people in their late 30s, kind of past 35, 36, almost into their 40s.
Sam Alvey.
Diego Sanchez is who I was going to say. Not have another avenue after MMA. We see this a lot in boxing and combat sports in general. You are so tied to this one thing. Like, Danny Garcia, I said this before last week. He is my favorite boxer and it's not even close. Do you know what Danny Garcia said after he won? He's like, all I think of myself as is a boxer. That's all I can attach who I am with. That's a really sad thing to hear, honestly. Like, Danny Garcia is one of the best in the world at what he does. He's just not as good as Earl Spence or Terrence Crawford. Who cares? You're still better than everybody else. So it does really suck to see people not retire and stay in the sport for too long. So I'm really happy to see James Krause finding something he can do outside of taking unnecessary punishment to the head, because I think that's very important for a lot of these athletes in the later stage of their career.
When it comes to this fight, though...
Now, when it comes to this fight, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. I'm a little bit worried about Jason Witt cutting weight back-to-back so fast. I remember this was a big conversation before Tony Ferguson fought Justin Gaethje. That fight had got moved a week. Remember, they were going to try to make it on, like, different athletic commissions, try to make Tony Ferguson fight Khabib. But we ended up getting Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. And going into that fight...
Or you could say it's more like Hasim Rahman Jr., where, hey, I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to cut the weight, and oh, guys, it's a spectacle. It's fun.
Hasim doesn't have a fight in 7 days, though. These guys did after they just cut weight, so not necessarily. The problem is, though, what do we know about fighters when they have bad weight cuts? Their cardio suffers, and normally their chin and durability suffers too.
Yeah, but this is all speculation, man.
Not at all. We know this for a fact, but people cut weight,
you're
they
just
have bad
speculating
chins.
that Jason Witt's now all of a sudden going to have this bad weight cut.
No, he just cut weight 7 days ago. I don't think either one of these athletes are going to have positive weight cuts. You didn't let me finish my point. Problem is, the big conversation we had about Jason Witt is that he's going to have great cardio going into this fight if he wants to win, and he's going to have to eat a big shot if he wants to win this fight. Those two factors have now been chipped away at a little bit, at least in my mind, because of the previous weight cut. And I will openly say, Josh Quinlan might not have as good of a chin because of his weight cut. He might not have as good of cardio because of his weight cut. But the thing is, I still really like his striking, and I still worry about sort of the brittle factor of Jason Witt. If I don't love your chin at 100%, I'm not sure how your chin's going to look after cutting weight only 7 days previously.
And on the flip side to that, I don't love Josh Quinlan's takedown defense, and vice versa for Jason Witt. Now here's a great opportunity. You can just work those takedowns. And I bet Jason Witt's going to come into this fight now, if he wasn't already upset about the whole Nevada State Athletic Commission thing, the fact that now it's not your fault that this fight's moved, not that Josh Quinlan wanted it to be moved, but Jason Witt's going to have a little bit of an added motivation factor. We have a look at the Tapology vote. Surprise to us there, to you. Quinlan was a big favorite the last time. Jason Witt now where we're at. I'm going to say over under 85% Quinlan, and there's going to be a limited sample size of votes.
I would say under, but just slightly.
And just slightly over 376 total votes, 87% Quinlan, 89% by knockout. For the 13% that have Witt, 65% by decision. I think Quinlan wins his fight. The pick is the same. I think he's going to be able to get the job done. Obviously with Witt, the losses, lots of knockout losses. It's a scary thing for Witt. It's just like Charlie Ontiveros is on this card as well, so look out for that video because that could be a barn burner of a fight. I like Quinlan in this matchup. I'd stay away from it personally just due to the fact that both guys cutting weight, traveling states to state in a week's notice, but yeah, I'm going with Quinlan.
Someone out there can definitely make a compelling argument for
yeah.
why Jason Witt can win this fight. Like you said, Quinlan struggles with the wrestling defense. We all know how good of a wrestler Jason Witt is. But again, I keep on going back to the fact that both these guys just cut weight 7 days ago, I should say, or not even, because we're filming these earlier in the week. But still, Jason Witt has to have really good cardio to beat Josh Quinlan. It is unquestionable. He has to outwork him. He has to outpace him. He has to put enough volume on him. And I mean more of his takedowns than his striking, just to really sat that gas tank of Josh Quinlan. And again, Quinlan's gas tank might be affected by his previous weight cut, but the fact that Jason Witt is 35, approaching 36, we all know how his chin is a bit of a question mark. I do still like Josh Quinlan, but I agree with everything you said. I would stay away from this fight betting-wise because there are so many question marks, especially coming off a weight cut only a week ago.
Both of us going with the Maverick, Josh Quinlan, to bring the win back to Vanderlei Silva's Las Vegas gym. Bet you never thought you'd hear that in 2022. Big-time fight coming up. We have 3 fights that have been moved or rebooked. We have a big-time main event, Marlon Vera taking on a man in his backyard, Dominic Cruz, fighting a Pachenga. Should be a great one. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, rescheduled up a weight class on short notice. We have the Queen of Violence, Ariane Lipski, taking on Zombie Girl Priscila Cachoeira. And for Ariane Lipski last week, Matt, she missed weight.
She did.
Unfortunate, you hate to see it, but she missed weight for the first time in her career. Came in at 128.5, was due to lose 20% of her purse. Cachoeira came in at 125.5. Now, our graphic doesn't denote that because these are graphics from before that time. And you're going to get a prediction from before that time, but hence we update the videos because we're astute and we like to do things like this with Fight Night Picks. But if you look at it for Lipski, this was the quotable. So listen, great scoops from Globo and Combate's own Evie Rodriguez. And she said, A, this one's going to be a bantamweight, so kudos to you. But the second one, this was from the tweet. Lipski went to hospital after weigh-ins, had COVID in camp, had medication for her lungs, and that her team believes that affected her weight cut. So maybe that was the issue behind it. You hate to see it, but Lipski coming into this matchup, missed weight a week ago. Now she has to cut weight, but it's only to 135. So we'll see how this plays out for both of these women. Obviously, we touched on a lot of their skills and attributes earlier on. We'll throw it to that earlier prediction video. We'll update the odds and give you a final look because this is another really odd reboot. Queen of Violence returned to form her last time out, and she's looking to get a win over Zombie Girl Priscila Cachoeira. A fan favorite, a channel favorite. We know you love her, and so do we. Her fights are fun. And her last time out, a big-time fight of the night against Ji-Yeon Kim, where everybody thought Ji-Yeon Kim won 2 rounds, and Priscila Cachoeira is still waiting for her Oscar after her interview that was the most awkward thing I've ever seen. They gave her a belt in jiu-jitsu, even though she did no jiu-jitsu.
It was weird.
All she does is power strike, Matt. She switched up her camp. She used to be with Prana Valetudo. She's now with Team Figueiredo, and Team Figueiredo, Figueiredo's not even with Team Figueiredo anymore. So is that weird?
It's very weird. I couldn't imagine still training in a gym where the owner/operator, I don't know the logistics of the gym, but still, it must be strange being like, hey, is he coming back? Like, do you think they say,
Francisco, where's he at, bud?
Devin went to get cigarettes and never came back? Like, is that what they're telling each other at the gym at this point?
I don't know. The guy dresses...
He rode away on Fernando the Bull, and they never saw him again.
He rocks around in sequin red shirts with Black Panthers, and then he cuts the weirdest promo I've ever seen with Brandon Reynolds.
Just an interesting man,
fight.
isn't he?
For Priscila Cachoeira, her last time out, she utilized her boxing, her power punching to get the win over Ji-Yeon Kim. I didn't think she won, but 2 judges did, so that's all that matters. I guess 3 of them did. It was a unanimous decision. She loses to Jillian Robertson by submission. She looked like a fish out of water in that one, and Robertson had nice enough things to say about her. Beat Gina Mazzani by knockout, where Mazzani looked good in the first round, had no gas in the second round. Beat Shanna Dobson by knockout 2.5 years ago. Lost to Luana Carolina by decision. She lost to Valentina Shevchenko in her UFC debut. She lost to Molly McCann by decision. And before that, from 2016 to 2017, she went on an 8-fight win streak and looked amazing and finished a lot of those by finish. That makes sense, Matt.
And that was the selling point going into the Valentina fight. Like, it was, hey, the zombie girl, you may have never heard of her. This is on short notice. This is her debut. But boy, has she finished a lot of women on the regional scene.
I'm sure Red Letter Media, if they're even a part of, interested in Fight Night picks, they're probably likening Priscila Cachoeira's Zombie Girl to the trailer of The Munsters by, Rob Zombie, my guy, because that trailer, they picked that damn thing apart. And I was halfway excited for that movie, and now I'm there.
I haven't seen Nope yet. I'm still very excited to see it.
Fair enough.
Haven't watched it.
This fight, though, Ariane Lipski did look very good her last time out against Mandy Byrne. Almost dropped her in the first round, at least rocked her. Dropped her in the second, dropped her in the third. Before that, 2-fight losing streak to Montana De La Rosa. Antonina Shevchenko had beaten Luana Carolina. Performance of the night bonus. Submission of the year caliber knee bar, where she went full violence. Beat Isabella De Padua, former KSW champ, won the belt, defended it twice. Beat Diana Belbizzi to win it. Her last title defense was over Silvana Gomez Juarez. It's in the UFC. But for Ariane Lipski, when you boil this fight down, Priscila Cachoeira, forward motion, boxing combinations, throws with a lot of power, brings the most emotion to her fight. For Ariane Lipski, switched her training up, trains at American Top Team, and she's primarily known as a Muay Thai artist that throws a lot of kicks. She's all right with her ground game, but not with her takedowns, and neither one of these women are all that adept on the ground.
This is my problem with the Queen of Violence. We talked about this a lot when Molly McCann fought her last fight. It was, hey, Molly, you're a big deal. When are you going to fight people on the borderline of the rankings? And for Lipski, she did kind of have that opportunity in 2 fights against Shevchenko and De La Rosa, but she didn't look good in those fights at all. For me, I just had a lot higher expectations for Lipski when she came over to the UFC, and she has not been able to reach that at all. So this is kind of a get back on the horse fight for both these athletes, because Cachoeira is a very...
Whoa. Get back on the horse. Lipski looked really good in her last fight.
Okay, she looked really good in her last fight, but when she's fought anybody near the rankings, she hasn't looked great, and that's my big problem. You are the champion of KSW. You are the queen of violence. You have not been that fighter at the UFC level whatsoever, and for me, I think this fight, more than any else on the card, comes down to volume over power, because if Lipski is able to stand on the outside, use some of that good Muay Thai, keep her hands up, which is really going to be a key factor in this fight, because for Priscila, we can talk about the negatives, we can talk about the eye pokes in the Jillian Robertson fight, they were awful, we can talk about her porous takedown defense. She does have very good power in her hands, though, and that's something you cannot take away from her. I know her knockout wins over the likes of Shayna Dobson and Gina Mazzani, and like you said, Mazzani looked good until she didn't, but not a lot of women in this weight division can just go out there and get TKO and KO victories, and Priscila, I would say, is one of the rare few who, if she can hit you with 4 or 5 power shots in a row, she's gonna put you down, or at least make you a much different version of yourself than you were earlier on in the fight. So that's where I can see a world where Priscila can have success. Let's say she can get on the inside of Lipski, start landing some of those boxing combinations, and let's say, 3 or 4 power shots do land, then maybe Cachoeira does have a game plan for some victories, but For Lipski, I really do like her steadiness with her striking in this matchup. I think some of those front kicks are going to be a really big problem for Priscila because Priscila does kind of square up her stance and walk in on just a straight line. And I think if Lipski is able to start employing some of her kicks, like you said, neither fighter's great on the mat, so I don't think Lipski's going to be all that concerned about the takedown attempts from Cachoeira. And I do think that's going to allow Lipski to really open up her striking game plan to its highest potential.
When I look at a battle between strikers, and let's face it, again, Cachoeira gets the belt, but that was like, here you go, here's the prize at the bottom of the cereal box. You won the fight. I guess we're doing this. When you look at it for Lipski, it's the more complete skill set on the feet versus the power puncher in Priscila Cachoeira. It's not like Randy Couture, James Toney. It's not anything like that. But when you do boil it down that way, I look at it similar to when Cachoeira fought somebody who's very good at Muay Thai in Luana Carolina. She got dropped in that fight. There were 30-26s there. There's better volume for Lipski as well. All right, so we have a look at the odds in the rebooking. Ariane Lipski, minus 185 favorite. Priscila Cachoeira, plus 160 the underdog. I'm eager to see the Tapology votes before we touch on this one any further. Lipski was the favorite with the voters last week. I'm going to say over-under... I don't know, 65% Lipski?
I think it'll be under, honestly.
You think it will?
Over, my bad.
377 total votes, 80% Lipski, 82% by decision. For the 20% that have Cachoeira, 65% by decision, a further 25% by knockout. This is a weird fight. You missed weight a week ago. I understand, medications this, medications that, but she missed weight. I thought maybe she was going to be compromised. Now it's up at bantamweight. You have all the particulars about, she trains in Florida, cut weight in Vegas. Now this fight's in California. There's too many unknowns for me now at this point. I still like Lipski with the overall skill set. I like her forward aggression, her body kicks, teep kicks, so on and so forth. Cachoeira, though, forever the boxer. Always aggressive. I think this now favors Cachoeira at 135 with the weight miss for Lipski. So I'm surprised to see the odds where they're at and the fans going with Lipski so overwhelmingly.
Even before you said I expect this fight to favor Cachoeira, I gotta be honest, I don't think I've ever done this on like a rebooking of a fight. I'm switching my pick on this one. We've seen Priscila knock out a fighter who missed weight at 135. She knocked out Gina Mazzani and made it look easy. And like Gina Mazzani, we saw her miss weight for the Sarah McMahon fight. And I know that fight was on short notice and Sarah McMahon was going to win no matter what. But we're talking about a 135er who fought at 135, who cut an insane amount of weight to weigh in at 125.
To be specific, Mazzani had missed weight one time at bantamweight. Their fight between Mazzani and Cachoeira at 125. Mazzani was making the move down to 25.
And she was a big favorite in that matchup,
she went
too.
Buck wild in the first round, and then in the second round, the gas tank was on E.
And this is my weird thing about this fight. I don't doubt that Ariane Lipski can have the higher levels of volume. I think she is the better technician on the outside. But this is my issue with the fight, and you would kind of mention it. If COVID affected her weight cut, how do we know it didn't affect her training regime too? And that's the thing. If you were struck with a very serious illness, if you were put on medications, I think when Luke Rockhold fought Chris Weidman, the story going into that fight was Luke Rockhold has a staph infection and did not go on antibiotics because he knew that would affect his gas tank in the fight. So he just fought with a staph infection, which is crazy. Like, I've never had a staph. Do you know anyone who's ever had one?
I'm sure I do.
I know
it disclosed to me? I don't know.
I know one person who told me they had a staph infection once, and they were like, this shit's terrible. Like, for sure have a shower after you ever train in life, because you want to avoid this stuff like the plague. My reasoning is, though,
you want to avoid it like MRSA.
You do, yeah, because that's the thing. I know MRSA and COVID are very different things, but still, I do worry about any time a fighter has an injury or anything like that, because if it affects your weight cut, then it probably affected the previous 6 to 8 to 10 weeks in your training camp. So I actually am going to switch my pick. I do think Priscila at 135 is going to be able to carry her power up a division a little bit better. And the difference is, if Lipski wins this fight, probably by unanimous decision, probably by split decision, don't really expect a finish from Lipski. And not that I'm going to sit here and say Priscilla's going to knock her out in the first round by any means, but if we're asking ourselves objectively who's more likely to get a finish, I don't think there's any doubt it's probably Priscila Cachoeira. She can land more power shots in the feet, and if she hurts Lipski, who did just cut weight a week ago, and I know it's a different weight class, but still, I do tend to favor Cachoeira, even though I don't love the pick all of a sudden. I do just feel like with all the by the ways around Ariane Lipski coming into this fight, that it is enough for me to switch my pick to Priscila, and that's why I guess below 80% when you would ask what Tapology votes were.
No, it really is a weird situation. I still have Lipski for the fact that I think she's the more well-rounded fighter, but when it does come down to this one, an odd one, let us know your thoughts on this one. Throw them down in the comments section below. We got a big-time card coming up this weekend. Listen, I mean, what Marlon Vera did to Rob Font, oh boy. And for Dominic Cruz, He beat Casey Kenning a while ago, but it should be an interesting main event. The UFC doesn't happen to go to San Diego area very often. Should be a fun one. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Youssef Zalal started off his UFC career at a blaring 3-0. It's now 3-3. He was originally due Dana White's Contender Series 2021 winner, Christian Quinlan this weekend. But Quinlan is out. So in on just 10 days notice, announced on August 3rd, we have the CFFC Bantamweight champ, Damon Blackshear, a guy that trains out of Jackson Wink MMA. And now, for the Fight Night Picks fans out there, it's a little bit of a story time. Because listen, Fight Night Picks started in 2018, in April of that year. In June of that year, I got the confidence up to go, you know what? I want to go to a live event. So I sent a message out to NEF just on Facebook. It was on a Wednesday. I said, hey, I know you guys have some cards coming up this summer. I'd be really interested coming down, covering one of them. Let me know what you think. And they went, well, we have one this weekend. Do you want to go? And I thought, well, fuck, it's 5 hours away down in Portland. I don't know if I can do it. So I asked my buddy Brandon, I said, you want to go to Portland for the weekend? He goes, yeah, let's do it. So I went down having no fucking clue what I was going to do. I'm this one guy with a cell phone. I got a computer. What the hell am I going to do?
Do you want a pat on the back?
No, all I'm saying is I didn't know what I was going to do. And in the main event, it was Damon Blackshear coming in as the guy that wasn't with the promotion, off of a loss in his last fight, to take on a guy out of Bangor Brewer area, Aaron Lacey. And in that fight, Damon Blackshear really did surprise me. He fought a great fight. I brought him on when it was just a podcast. I had a great interview with Damon Blackshear. All this to say, he was one of those really early fighters from the ground floor that I followed with Fight Night Picks that you can go back and have a look at. And motherfucker, he's with the UFC now. And it's just awesome to see those prospects make it to that top level. And for Blackshear, you look at it, I mean, the guy had a great, impressive run as an amateur. He went 7-1 there. The only loss, a decision to Tony Gravely. As a pro.
And he had beat Tony Gravely earlier on in his amateur career, so not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. As a pro, loses to Keith Richardson by split decision. Loses to Chris Mutino by decision with CES. Loses to Pat Sabatini by decision with CFFC. Loses to Danny Sabatello, who's like this dark horse motor mouth over with Bellator right now. But you look at the wins that he's been able to have. You look at Damon Blackshear, the performances. I know he fought at Rock Training, ROC, Team Rock, and that was great. But since he's made the move to Jackson Wink, Damon Blackshear, if you don't know this guy, all the conversation this week is going to be Blackshear's on short notice. Youssef Zalal is such a good fighter in the UFC, and I understand that. Damon Blackshear is going to be a guy in the UFC for a long time, and I love that he finally got signed to the promotion.
And I think he's going to be the type of guy who the octagon jitters won't get to him. Now, that's very easy for me to say earlier on in the week. I haven't seen these guys fight yet, but still, this is an interesting fight to me. Please feel free to zag, because this is not where I'm going to hand it off to you. I think there's a chance this fight's a dud. I really do. Now, this is why I say that. For Youssef Zalal, we all know how well-rounded his skill set is and how, hey, he does have good power punching. He's somebody who can blitz from the outside. We know that he does have the wrestling background, even though that was kind of his downfall against Ilia Topuria. But still, Topuria is one of the best fighters in the world, much less the division. So, I just think there's a world where Blackshear is a little bit hesitant from the outside, doesn't want to go for those crazy bursts that we know him for, and I'll talk about those more a little bit later. I just feel like there is a world where both fighters realize how dangerous their opponent is and what position they are in the UFC. Let's be honest, we both really like Youssef Zalal coming into the UFC, but 3 losses in a row is a tough look for anybody as skilled as he is. Now, at only 25, bordering 26 years of age, there's definitely a world where, let's say he does get cut from the organization, he could come back and look really good in his second round. Look at guys like Julian Erosa who've been able to do that. Damon Jackson is another guy who comes to mind. Like, it's not like it's a death sentence if you do get cut from the organization, but
Dustin Jacoby doing the damn thing.
Exactly, and he looks phenomenal as of late. Really good example. So, I do feel like there's a world where Zalal comes into this fight trying to fight in a tentative manner. Now, will Blackshear even give him that opportunity? I think there is a world where Damon is a little bit on the back foot and it takes him a bit of round to feel out this fight. And then maybe after that first round, we do get a lot of action. But I do feel like there is going to be a heavy feeling out process between these two athletes. Just because for Zalal, we all know how talented his sort of Hall of Fame version can be, even though we've yet to see that in his past number of performances. And for Blackshear, I agree with everything you said. His losses are to great fighters who have made it to the UFC. How many times do we come on this show and we go, hey, this guy might be 17-2, but has lost to a guy who was like 2-14 and a guy was 1-17. Like, Blackshear's lost to fighters that you and I both know very well who have fought at this level, and there's no shame in those whatsoever. So I do feel like it's one of those win or you learn. And I do think that Blackshear has been able to learn throughout his career because he has shown improvements based off of the losses. Again, I just keep on going back to there's a version of this fight where both guys a little bit tentative. It comes down more to the volume numbers than anything because neither guy is able to get the takedown. And I do fear that a little bit in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this for Zalal, comes into the UFC, fights Austin Lingo, it's kind of thrown together. Zalal looks great in that matchup. The craziest part about it is, though, like 18 years old, he makes his pro debut in 2015. This is where the numbers get weird, and I told Matt before we started any of this, we were really excited about this fight, hopefully it shows, but I said, I've got this weird wrinkle to throw into this fight. So, you look at all of these ones that Zalal has had in the UFC, he's the favorite against Jordan Griffin, he's the favorite against Peter Barrett, he's the favorite against Ilia Topuria, he's a minus 245 favorite against Sungwoo Choi. Lost to Topuria, it's gonna happen, lost to Sungwoo Choi, Sting. He was the underdog against Austin Lingo. He was the underdog against Sean Woodson, and I know that one's a contentious fight. It's a split decision fight. I thought Sean Woodson was able to get it done on the feet, but I do look at this. My big comp that I've had the whole way along is that Youssef Zalal is kind of like a not so refined version of Bobby Green. He can strike from the outside. He can defend the takedown. He's probably not going to go for his own takedown, but his boxing's something that can get it done for him. But for Zalal, Factory X and Muay Thai, those last 3 fights, it's left a lot to be desired out of him. And a big thing that I have, like, he does have really good wrestling defense. He has shown that in the UFC.
Exactly.
I know it was his detriment against Ilia Topuria, but flip that on its head and forget about what you think about Jordan Griffin. Defended 6 of 8 Jordan Griffin takedowns, and he was able to mix things up on the feet. So I like a lot of things out of Youssef Zalal. I do like the volume that he's able to throw, but the trouble that I have is, I don't know if Blackshear is going to give him any inch. I mean, you look at the guys that Blackshear fought, moving up through this. He wrestled at Frankfurt High School. He's a public league champ over there. But I look at the guys that he's fought. Fought former cage, CS bantamweight champ Josh Smith. Fighting really tall, had his hands down low. You look at the way that Blackshear initiates some of these clinch situations, the takedowns. When he flows in his grappling, I talk about this a lot. TJ Dillashaw is one of my favorite grappler wrestlers in MMA. Damon Blackshear is of that ilk where he's just so creative, flowing between his positions, gaining momentum out of the scrambles, getting in these advantageous positions. And if he doesn't get the armbar in this spot, well then holy hell, he switches to a back-mounted crucifix, or he gets your back and he's going and he's got the hooks in and then he's going rear naked choke. I know Blackshear has a lot of rear naked finishes, but I love the ground game. I love the finishing aspects. Now we get to find out, hey, can he do it on the big stage against Youssef Zalal? That's the biggest question, and it's on 10 days' notice. And Youssef Zalal's never fought at 135 pounds before. I know he's getting ready for a fight at 135. It kind of feels like a bit of a weird move. 3 losses, now we're at 135, but
He's a young guy, though, I will point that out.
yeah, he's had 15 fights. He's fought between 155, 145, and 140. This is the first one at bantamweight for Blackshear. All of this experience at 135. I'm really eager to see this fight because obviously I framed it in a couple of different ways. I love what Zalal brings to the cage. He's so dynamic, so well-rounded. For Blackshear, decent striking, not his hallmark. Really lights out grappler. I think this is such a fun fight. I can't wait for this fight.
Youssef Zalal is officially in my Dante Exum category. And I loved Dante Exum at one point. God, I thought he was going to be good in the NBA. But the problem is, I thought Youssef Zalal was going to be great too, and he has had some flat performances as of late, but I agree with you 100%. You have to bring up the fact that Blackshear only took this fight on 10 days' notice, and that does matter. Like, short notice fights really do matter. Do you know why fighters have a 10 to 8 to 6 week training camp? Because they need to if they want to win fights. And the fact that Youssef Zalal was preparing for a fight this weekend, whereas Blackshear is brought in on short notice, does make me a little bit worried about just not the level of fitness, I shouldn't say, about Blackshear, but still, all the intangibles we know about taking a fight on short notice, the weight cut, their level of preparedness. We can go into a bunch of different categories, but still, for Zalal, he's fighting for his UFC career, and I cannot stress that enough. And I really do think his takedown defense is going to be the most important part of his game, because on the feet, again, I worry about Zalal's not great output. He has good output, and that's the only difference between him and like a Bobby Green. Bobby Green doesn't have to knock you out on the feet to be able to beat you. He can hit you 100 times a round and still be able to win those rounds and win a decision. For Zalal, it does come down a little bit more to his power punches than just his overall output. I do, because I don't think Zalal's the type of guy who can go out there and really put it on you in that like Hall of Fame pace way. I think he can land a good power shot here or there, but I really think he has to have a big striking advantage over his opponent to then be able to set up some kind of a big shot. Kind of like how we talked earlier about like a Josh Quinlan setting up traps. I think we're going to have to see a lot of that out of Youssef Zalal for him to really have success, and even against my better judgment, I still find myself slightly leaning to Zalal. Just because, again, he had the full training camp. I agree with you. I think this is going to be a very fun fight. And I look at this fight for Blackshear almost like when David Onama had fought Mason Jones at 155. It's like, hey, you make good account of yourself. You might not win. You might not lose. It doesn't really matter the outcome. You're going to get another opportunity with the organization. And I think Blackshear is going to have a lot of success at this level. I do agree with you on that front. But I do ever so slightly like Youssef Zalal just for his well-rounded game and that takedown defense. I think that's going to be an extremely important key for this fight.
The odds open with Zalal a minus 170 favorite. They're about at par right now, meaning that Blackshear open a plus 145. And if we have a look at the Topology votes, surprise to us as they are to you, Zalal's been in the UFC. He was the underdog in his last fight against Woodson, the underdog in his debut against Austin Lingo, and then the other 4 fights, he was a big favorite against Sung Woo Choi. He is the more well-known commodity, but he hasn't fought. His last fight against Sean Woodson was a year ago, and for Blackshear, fought 2 months and a little bit ago. I'm going to say, again, Zalal, over under 70%.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under? It's slightly under. So 451 total votes, 63% Zalal, 91% by decision. For the 37% that have Blackshear, 58% by decision, 27% by submission. See, this is where I think Zalal, I think if he puts a good pitter-patter game from the outside going, if he can deter Blackshear from some of those takedown entries, force him into a striker, I think Zalal can get a win here. I think Damon Blackshear is gaining so much out of Jackson Wink. I know Arlene Blanco, Holly Holm really featured a lot on the Instagram game. I think Blackshear is finally rounding out into that final form at 28. Took some bumps in the road against a really good level of competition on the regional scene. You'll love to see a former CFFC champ in the UFC. Obviously, Sabatini, the connection there. I think Blackshear is going to be able to get it done in this matchup. You hate it. Zalal's on a 3-fight losing streak, so we zig and we zag. I have Blackshear in this matchup. You have Zalal. I think it's going to be a good one, though.
I don't think I've ever heard you say, well, this person trains with Arlene Blanco, so they're probably going to have a big advantage. Should be a really fun fight, like I said, and I can see where you're coming from with the Blackshear pick, but I do feel like Zalal's UFC experience is really going to help him in this matchup.
Big time matchup coming up this weekend. I'm going with the Diamond, Dustin Poirier. No, it's Blackshear to get the win in this one. You're going with the Moroccan Devil, Youssef Zalal. Let us know in the comment section. I really want to hear from you out there because I'm surprised that the votes are where they are on Topology. So let us know who you have in this matchup. We have another fight in the bantamweight division up at the top. Marlon Vera taking on Dominic Cruz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, it's not a Conor McGregor card, it's an Ode Osbourne card. The Jamaican sensation Ode Osbourne, hoping that good things come in threes, and he's looking to make it 3 straight wins, taking on Hawaii's Tyson Nam, a guy who's 2-3 in his 5-on-in. He's nearly 39 years old. He's a former X1 World Events flyweight champion. Challenged for the belt over with Fight Nights Global. Had a lot of success over with that organization. Fights with Ali Bagautinov, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, fighters that you know and you love. But coming into this matchup this weekend, obviously all of the momentum rides with the younger fighter. It is Ode. There were questions around the weight cut from 135 to 125. He loses to Manel Kape, but he's looked pretty damn good in his last 2 fights. And if you look at it for both these guys, I mean, if your name is Jerome Rivera, if your name is Zaruk Adashev, don't watch this fight. They did not have good success against these 2 guys.
Can Jerome Rivera not watch any fight at the UFC level?
It just did not go well. It was a mixed bag. It was a weird bucket of muscles.
It's a bad bag, not a
for Jerome Rivera. But when you do look at this matchup, Matt, I mean, both of these guys can have success with the striking. For Tyson Nam, good takedown defense. It's only been tested in the UFC against Kai Kara France. He defended all 4 of those takedowns, so that's why you see that 100% takedown defense stat. But for Tyson Nam, he's going to stalk you. He's going to try and strike with you. And he's going to try and finish you with a right hook. And that's pretty much the Tyson Nam plan. I have a lot to talk about with Tyson Nam in his style, but man, when that right hand lands, it can be good night.
The problem is he just doesn't let it go as much anymore at this stage of his career, and I agree 100% with the first thing you brought up. Tyson Nam at almost 39 years of age in the flyweight division is a little bit worrying because I know how excited we both were for him coming over to the UFC. He's got great striking, his technique is very good, but the problem is he reminds me a lot of Douglas Lima by the time he got the Bellator title. Douglas Lima got the title in Bellator at like 34 years of age. He was a little bit older in life, but in MMA experience, he was in that perfect sweet spot. And the problem was, when you're fighting a lot of these young up-and-comers who are really good, they're going to give you really tough fights because they have that little added athleticism that you no longer have. And for Tyson Nam, I kind of look at it in the same way. Him at 100%, if he had like an Al Horford whole year off with OKC and then showed up with Boston, I think we could see the best version of him. And maybe the time off has really helped Tyson Nam a lot more than it would help other fighters because he is a little bit older in his career. He might need that extra time to kind of recharge his batteries, if you will. But Ode Osbourne, for another outside of MMA reference, he reminds me a little bit of Chris Davis or even Joey Gallo. It's like, hey, you do this one thing extremely well. How can we make that one part of your game even more successful? And my big problem with Ode Osbourne early on in his career was, hey, I really like his power, but he almost needs that sweet spot of ranges to really find his power shots and really be able to attack with them. But what I really like at Ode Osbourne of his last two fights is he seemed like he's been able to open that Goldilocks range, which is really nice to see because at a certain point, I thought Ode Osbourne was much more of a boxer puncher. He'd rely on you closing the distance to really hit you with a good counter shot. But I do think Osbourne has made advancements in his game that we've yet to see from Tyson Nam. Now again, Nam hasn't been in the cage in a very long time. His last opponent was one of the best fighters in the world too. So for Nam, I do think there are a lot of question marks coming into this matchup, but against Ode Osbourne, I do think he can have success on the outside with some of his kicks. The problem is, if he tries to get into boxing range with Osbourne, although I do still worry about the Osbourne cardio a little bit down at 125, I like Ode Osbourne in a lot of factors in this matchup.
Matt Schnell just got directly called one of the best athletes in the entire world.
In the division. I said one of the best fighters in the division. That's not at all what I said.
In that fight, which was January 2021, Tyson Nam won the third round. The second round was a swing round for Eric Clone. The other two judges had round one, round two. For Matt Schnell, he gets the win. Matt Schnell won round one, round two. I didn't see a second round for Tyson Nam. But when I do look at it for Nam, in the UFC, he's had 4 fights. He's 0-2 at flyweight. He's 2-0 at bantamweight. And if you look at it for Nam, he knocked out Jerome Rivera at 135. He got a performance bonus knocking out Zaruk Adeshev at 135. Ode Osbourne knocked out Jerome Rivera at 145. And he got a performance bonus for knocking out Zaruk Adeshev. So both guys very similar that way. But when I watch Tyson Nam fight, this is my big takeaway. He's like a fundamental shortstop in the 1990s. It's like watching Omar Vizquel winning all those Golden Gloves. Forget about anything he did outside of the diamond. Just focus on what he did. When you're a kid and you learn how to play shortstop or middle infield, you got to make sure your feet are planted shoulder length apart. You're on the balls of those feet. You're down, you're ready for that, and you move your glove. You don't go all willy-nilly. You're keeping the fundamentals. It's all about fundamentals. Tyson Nam, he keeps his feet just more than shoulder length apart and moves great side to side. Doesn't really cut the cage with foot position. He's very much side to side, side to side, side to side. He doesn't get crossed up. He doesn't get tripped up with his movement. He's not a guy that darts in a lot forward or backward, but he really does cut the cage well. Not big on foot position, and he's just waiting to bait that left hand out there, pumping it out there, because he doesn't throw much of a jab, and he throws at a really poor accuracy rate in UFC. It's just pump, 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 figure out where you're at, and then he throws that right hook. And that's been Tyson Nam in the UFC. Now for a guy where they always say, later in your career, that's where power's the last thing to leave you. We don't say that at flyweight very often, but that's where Tyson Nam is at. And in this matchup, you always worry about Osbourne at 125 with the chin. He has been susceptible to getting finished. But when I look at this matchup, this is another camp for Ode at Syndicate MMA. His fight against CJ Vergara was kind of blasé, I guess. It was just kind of because Vergara had a great third round in that matchup. When I do look at this one, Osbourne, again, I like the advancements in the striking with Syndicate. His first camp there for his last fight. We get to see it again over there. And for Osbourne, 2-1 UFC at flyweight, 0-1 at bantamweight, 1-0 at featherweight. And 9 of his 11 wins are by finish. So both guys finishers. You've seen that in the past. The odds in this matchup, Osbourne open a minus 220 favorite. Minus 230 right now. Tyson Nam open plus 185, plus 190. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprise to us there, to you. If Osbourne's that big of a favorite, I'm going to say over under Osbourne 75%.
I think it'll be lower, but I think it'll be the favorite.
All right, so we have a look at the votes. Tapology. Oh boy.
Big favorite.
563 total votes. 87% Osbourne. 67% by decision. 25% by knockout for the 13% that have Tyson Nam, 39% by decision, 53% by knockout. I think if Tyson Nam wins, it's probably going to be by knockout as well. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. But, I mean, I look at this one. Nam hasn't been in the octagon for over a year and a half. He is, a couple months away from being 39. He has been not a step short in the UFC. He's just reliant on his power. And if he's not doing anything from that distance, Ode Osbourne is a longer, rangier guy for this division. Has 5 inches of reach. Has about the same in height. But he utilizes his reach fairly well. The one thing I worry, though, if he's waiting to bait Tyson Nam, we could get a little bit of a boring fight. But he does have that great lead right hook of his own. So I love the matchup, Matt. What's your pick here?
I still like Ode Osbourne in this fight. Again, Tyson Nam might be the more dynamic fighter on the feet. But again, lost to Matt Schnell's last time out. One of the best fighters in this division, without a doubt. I'm perfectly fine with saying that. If you guys want to get mad at me in the comment section, go right ahead. But for Nam, I do like his combinations on the feet when he does decide to throw them. But you're right. It feels like everything he does is to set up that right hand against someone like Ode Osbourne. Of course, that could land. He could have success against him. But I do think Osbourne does have... he has the more... high probability, I guess, to just land that one big power shot. Because for Nam, there is a lot of pitter-patter to try to set traps on the feet. And I do feel like that goes into his accuracy numbers. Because you're right. If you look at Tyson Nam, the technician, you would assume he has a lot more success on the feet than he probably does. I just feel like Nam does try to set up his overall power shots almost a little bit too much. Kind of like Uriah Hall near the end of his career. So I do like Ode Osbourne, especially if you can get Nam up against the cage too. If you can limit some of that movement of Nam, it's going to make him a much more stationary target than land his own power shots.
I could sooner see an early Nam finish or Ode Osbourne taking it a little bit longer. Nam tends to get behind on the numbers and then he's got to rally himself back in, or early knockout. So I have Ode Osbourne in this fight, going with the younger fighter in this matchup. You can make a great argument for either guy, and I suggest you do down below in the comment section. Big fights, including one up a weight class of bantamweight between Marlon Vera and Dominic Cruz in that main event. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. With a combined record of 3-7 in their respective last 10 fights, and for the American bad boy, Charlie Ontiveros, his last win over 5-4, Washington Luis, back in December of 2019, gonna look to turn around his fortunes at 155 pounds, taking on Gabriel Mugly Benitez, a guy who kneed Justin Jane's spine out of his back in 2029.
One of the grossest knockouts I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it was awesome and bad at the same time. I mean, when I look at this matchup, obviously, Matt, for Charlie Ontiveros, the results have not been good in the UFC. Comes in on short notice at 185, fighting Kevin Holland, who was a Phoenix Rising in 2020, and he loses that fight. And then his last time out against Steve Garcia, he loses again by finish. For Ontiveros, he's 11-8. And he's big, and he's the most accredited Kempo karate guy you're going to find at 155 pounds, and he fights like it. He's got that low... like Street Fighter video game style stance where he throws backwards axe kick, which if you do forget, I mean, he did get finished by Steve Garcia's last time out, but don't forget that he wobbled and dropped Steve Garcia with an axe kick. Then he wobbled him with a straight shot, but then he wasn't able to get it done. And in the second round, Garcia was able to take over, get the finish. For Charlie Ontiveros, the parts are there. If I showed you a silhouette of Charlie Ontiveros fighting, you go, hey, that guy with that weird hair, and that guy that really fights in an odd style.
His shoulder.
And he's way too big for 155. That guy's a lot of fun to watch, and I agree with you. The trouble is for Charlie Ontiveros, obviously all the finished losses, some of them have been by injury, some have been, neck related, or he did actually get TKO'd, but the combined record of the wins for Ontiveros, 46-30. So it hasn't been that great. The combined record of the losses, 62-25. Those 7 of the 8 losses by knockout include losses to Jeff Neal and Michael Venom Page. It's kind of wild levels of competition. And also 1-0 Will Morris not that long ago.
Not to put words in your mouth, but I think we can agree on this. You're not as nerdy as I am, just in day-to-day life. I'm not like a crazy nerd, but I'm about middle tier. This fight's like Batman versus Superman. Hear me out. Well, Superman definitely beats Batman. He has superpowers. The other guy's a regular person. Gabriel Benitez is way more skilled than Charlie Ontiveros. I don't think anyone's going to argue that with me.
In mixed martial arts, yeah.
Exactly.
I'd say so.
Much cleaner on the feet with his striking. I would even say he has a grappling advantage. He's someone who has shown the ability to throw out some defensive submissions in the past. I'm not saying Benitez is some god off his back by any means, but still, he has a very nice foundation for this sport without a doubt. Where that conversation always goes into with Batman versus Superman is, though, how much time does Batman have to prepare, you know? He's got gadgets, he's smart. If he has time to prepare, maybe he can make the difference. And for Charlie Ontiveros, I agree with you. The intangibles do favor him. I expect these guys to look like they are 7 weight classes apart on Fight Night. I truly do. I think Ontiveros is going to look like a middleweight, and I think Benitez is going to look like a featherweight. Probably where both these guys belong. But I could not agree more with one of the statements you made. Charlie Ontiveros is at the point where the weight cut becomes a point of diminishing returns. Cutting weight does help people, and I'm in a very small minority, or a very small boat, I should say, to where, like, weight cutting in MMA is not, like, the worst thing ever. Like, the good thing about cutting weight in MMA is it makes sure that you are in the best shape of your life to be able to make that weight so you cut off the extra fat. Like, there are positives to it. I understand the people who make these crazy weight cuts, there's more negatives than positives, but still, when you require people to weigh in at a specific weight class, look at the difference between the quality of fights in, like, bantamweight or heavyweight. In heavyweight, you have a very wide range that you can weigh in. You see a lot of those guys physically, and you think, hey, I look like that guy, and I'm on the couch. Charlie Ontiveros is going to have to make a dramatic weight cut to get down to 155, and I'm always concerned about that at this weight class, because Benitez is someone who's almost on the opposite side of that scale. We both talked a lot in his fight with Omar Morales about, hey, how is he going to deal with the bigger guy? Is he going to be able to go up and sort of match physically that larger fighter? Now, against Omar, he was not able to, but Morales is much more of a pressure boxer. He's sort of all over you when he fights, whereas Ontiveros will kind of play your game from the start of the fight, and that's what I worry about. If Ontiveros feels like, hey, I'm the bigger guy, I'm the more powerful striker, maybe I can go out there and strike for strike with Benitez. I've got bad news for him, because I really do think the body shots of Benitez are going to be important for this fight, because let's say Ontiveros does cut a lot of weight, and I think a 6'2" guy fighting at 155, it's fair to say he cuts a decent amount of weight. I do worry about his susceptibility to the body shots against a guy who we mention all the time. Like, Benitez has some of the best body attacks in the UFC, so I think that's a very key X factor that might make the whole difference in the fight.
I think you're going to get a knockout in this fight, and it's really hard to tell you who. Gabriel Benitez hasn't really looked all that great. Obviously, he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Now, if I go through the performances, you look at just these last 5. Microcosm. Finished by Sadiq Youssef.
He did drop him, though.
Competitive fight against Omar Morales, loses a decision. Finishes Justin James. Loses to Billy Q in a fight of the night. And then he loses to David Onama by knockout, where he gets, like, the referee lets a lot of stuff fly that really didn't need to fly. Now, Benitez did rock David Onama, had him pawing at that eye. Benitez was looking pretty damn good as a big underdog. But when I do look at it, I mean, Benitez, he's got a fight of the night. He's got 2 performance bonuses. I figure, okay, well, maybe Benitez can implement some wrestling. And then I had to really put my glasses on and push him up tight. He has 1 takedown in his UFC career. It's a slam knockout against Humberto Bandenay. So I understand that he's not a wrestler. I would think maybe try and implement some of his grappling or some of his jiu-jitsu. It's hard to do that when you can't wrestle. So not to say that he can't. It's just that I haven't seen it. It's Santa Claus. It's not that he's not real, I just haven't seen him.
What I do like out of Benitez, though, is we know that once it does hit the mat, I agree with you, he does lack sort of the transitional ability to take the fight from the feet to the mat, or vice versa, but he does some lost fish off his back out of water. Like, he does show a good level of jiu-jitsu off his back, he can get back up to his feet, so I think on the mat, I think it's fair to say Benitez does have the advantage out of these two, but on the feet, again, do you like the technical prowess of Gabriel Benitez, or do you think the size at a certain point is going to outweigh whatever technical advantages you might have at this weight class? Because that's the thing about Benitez, I'm curious how much weight he does cut to get to 155. It might only be like 5 pounds, 6 pounds, 7 pounds, almost like Cowboy moving down to 170. Like, he doesn't really look that much different on weigh-ins or the day of the fight, so I think it will be a very interesting fight between these two guys, but for Benitez, I still think he's a little bit cleaner on the feet, and Ontiveros has not shown me much at the UFC level. Like, that's not a wild thing to say either. He hasn't looked great, and at 155, I just don't know what version of him we're going to get.
Well, I mean, for Gabriel Benitez open, a decent favorite, minus 280, minus 367 right now is the average. For Ontiveros open, plus 220, plus 282. If you go with the minus 367 implied odds, win probability 78.6%. for Benitez to win. We have a look over on Topology. The votes are a surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say, okay, over under 78.6% Benitez. You're going to say over under?
Without a doubt, lower.
Say lower? It's over. 578 total votes, 87% Benitez, 19% by decision, 74% by knockout. For the 13% that have Ontiveros, 59% by knockout. I don't think, we're way too early in the week to have anything in terms of props or whatnot. I think Gabriel Benitez can get the win. I think there's just going to be a finish, and there's a lot of variables here. Eager to see these guys face off on Friday and offer up a final pick and prediction on Question Mark Kicks on Saturday, the live show, 2 hours before the prelim. So cheap plug there. I like Benitez, like the kicking game, like the boxing game. But for the bigger guy, Ontiveros, if he can pressure Benitez back against the cage, unless you're Justin James, it could be a good opportunity for Ontiveros to get his first UFC win.
You have a big guy who cuts a lot of weight against one of the best body attackers in the UFC. Again, some of the intangibles I do worry about because on Fight Night, Ontiveros should be the bigger guy. I don't doubt that at all. Like, I would look Charlie Ontiveros dead in the eyes. And, like, I'm a thin guy. I weigh more than 155 pounds.
Are you a fun guy?
Without a doubt, I'm a fun guy. I'm more fun than Kawhi Leonard. You brought that up 2 weeks in a row now. You're a big Kawhi and Raptors jerseys fans. But for Gabriel Benitez, and I've had people in my DMs be like, hey, you're the Gabriel Benitez. You're like the Spike Lee of Gabriel Benitez. No one's ever said that, but still. I have had people be like, hey, you're the only person who talks about Gabriel Benitez, and I appreciate it. He is a fun action fighter, and that's how I look at this fight. We had talked about Drew Dober fighting Rafael Alves a couple weeks ago, and it was, hey, we had that in the Fight of the Night screen, and I didn't doubt Alves could win that fight, but still, if they fight in a Fight of the Night manner, I do favor Drew Dober. With these guys, I kind of look at it the same way. I think this is going to be a very exciting fight, especially from the get-go, but who do I favor if it does become one of those Fight of the Night style fights? Charlie Ontiveros, who's 11-8 with a lot of finished losses, or Gabriel Benitez, who may not have looked great as of late.
He's batting 500 in the UFC,
exactly.
6-6.
But we all know how good he can be on his best day, and I would take the potential ceiling of Gabriel Benitez over the intangibles of Ontiveros.
Both of us going with a yikes, big favorite, Gabriel Benitez to get the win. You let us know down below in the comments section, because there were a lot of Charlie Ontiveros fans before the Steve Garcia fight. We want to hear from you folks down there in the comments. The big fights on this card. 135, the dance in the main event. Marlon Vera taking on Dominic Cruz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Big time fight coming up this weekend. We have the former Octagon heavyweight champ, Badius Martin Buday, and he was able to get a win in his UFC debut in very, very controversial fashion, and that's the kind of sticking point of this entire video. Martin Buday won by technical decision because he threw downward elbows to the back of Chris Barnett's head. Lukasz Brzeski, who's on this card as well, the Bull, so he stole his nickname from John Makdessi. Wow. The Bull. He's been in the UFC for over 10 years. For Brzeski, won on Contender Series last year. It's overturned to a no contest due to the presence of clomiphene in a drug test. He won that fight over Dylan Potter, who came in on short notice, and it was a fun fight. We all enjoyed it. But did Dylan Potter tap? Well, Mark Smith thought so. I didn't. My eyes didn't.
If Mark Smith was there, though.
Mark Smith saw the tap. I mean, Alistair Overeem felt the tap.
Okay, you were at home watching. Mark Smith was in the cage.
I saw every angle. He didn't tap.
Mark Smith was there. If he saw a tap, how can you disagree with it?
I disagree with it. But regardless, we come into this fight where we have two styles that match up so well together. And it's such a fun fight. I mean, you can attack it from this angle. I mean, you have Slovakia's Martin Buday, the second man out of Slovakia in the UFC, next to his teammate at a Spartacus fight gym, Ludwig Klein. And I said team out, not teammate, but listen, team in, because the team over
Ludwig
at Spartacus...
Klein's so hot right now.
Ludwig Klein is undefeated fighting out of Spartacus, and he's defeated fighting out of Sanford MMA. He's 0-2 over there. Martin Buday's 1-0 in the UFC fighting out of that gym. Spartacus has got it going on right now. For Lukasz Brzeski, a guy out of Poland, he's trained at so many different gyms, so many different great fighters. He obviously referenced Jan Blachowicz quite a bit when he was coming into the UFC. Obviously, sketchy circumstances over A, a controversial tap, but B, the no contest and the 9-month suspension after the fact. But when I break these two guys down stylistically, Matt, I can talk out of both sides of my mouth for both guys here earning victories inside of the octagon, and that doesn't happen every day. I love this fight booking. I think it's just, I think it's fair, and I think the fans are really going to like this one.
I'm really excited for Lukasz at the UFC level because, again, looking at his fights prior to this, there are some very nice skills that he can build upon once he does get to this level. I brought up a lot, we were talking before the camera started rolling. I love his ability to finish opponents up against the cage, not even just to finish them. I just like the scenarios he goes through. Because how many fighters do we see? They get their opponent in a good position and they go buck wild. They don't really worry about their technique. They just get very overzealous with their style of fighting. We see this all the time. Then you look at someone like in last weekend's co-main event, for instance. Jeff Neal got Vicente Luque hurt, did not get wild at all. And Jeff Neal's someone who we've talked about a lot on this channel for just how intelligent he is with his finishing patterns. Look at how he did to Luque. Hurt him, hit him with 47 uppercuts.
Took the second round off and then just absolutely went motorboat in the third round.
He was Bangkok ready, that's for damn sure in that third round. But what I like out of Lukasz is, when he gets guys up against the cage, he's not just a headhunter. He's not someone who's going to throw a lot of left and right hooks hoping for the finish. Go to the body, he will use his kicks effectively in this manner. But this fight, more than any other on the card, is going to come down to what Teddy Atlas likes to refer to as geography. Who can get this fight to where they want it to be better? Because if Buday's the one pushing forward, being very aggressive with his striking style, not really worried about the power coming back his way, and if he is able to use some of his own grappling, I really do think he can have a very nice path to success in this matchup. Even though, for Lukasz, he does have submission wins, but they're not necessarily like, oh, he's Damian Maia. You know, I look at them a little bit more as like, maybe not even Carl Robertson. That's not a good example either.
Even when he was taking on Potter, the commentary was like, well, he's off to the side. He's not even on the back. It was like an AJ Dobson submission. He's on the side going for a rear naked. You think, well, that's not going to work at this level.
And you're probably going to agree with me on this. One of the first things I noticed with Lukasz, he's got to be so strong. Like, if you're fighting him, you have to be worried about every punch he throws, and you have to be worried about if he is able to dig underhooks. And I think underhooks, overhooks, not to sound like Dominic Cruz, one half of this weekend's main event, I think those will be very important in this fight.
So, in the matchup for Brzeski taking on Dylan Potter, he gets the win. It's controversial. Dana White, after the fact, said, I'm on the fence with Lukasz. Say what you want. He didn't tap. He wasn't getting out of that choke, so they ended up signing him regardless. He did get a win on the regional scene over Ednaldo Oliveira, who was in the UFC, fought Gabriel Gonzaga and lost to him. He had 2 fights he lost, and since then he's fought some guys. But for Brzeski, the level of competition, not really the greatest. He was also a minus 445 favorite over Potter. But what I did like out of Brzeski that I was able to see on the regional scene and in the fight against Potter, he starts every fight off by throwing 15 to 20 hard leg kicks. Closing the distance, throwing chopping calf kicks, and you like to see that. Softens up his opponent, and then he can get into his boxing. And Lukasz Brzeski, his boxing's really weird. It's not super technical. He does kind of like to throw his left hand out straight to just kind of like wing his right hand. There's a lot of power on it. He doesn't have good takedown defense, Brzeski, at all. Like that fight against Michal Kita, that's a guy that's fought a really good level of competition over on the Polish scenes. Doesn't matter the organization. He's fought a lot of guys that you know, that you love. You've seen Kita on some of those records. In that fight, Kita was able to really just ground out Brzeski.
He was.
Take him down, hold him up against the rage. And you might go, Craig, what's a rage? Have I heard of that before? Well, M1 Global used to have it. And Babylon also had it.
Can I be honest? It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
So if you've never heard of it before, picture this. If you're 6 feet tall, 5'11", 6'2", whatever, you can figure this out. If we're talking like my calf down, well, that's a chain link fence.
I would just say, look at a boxing ring. Up until the first rope, it is cage.
It's cage. It's like a baseball field. It's whatever you want to think. It's chain link. Above that, it's a ring. You can get a little creative, but not really. Do you train with it? Probably not, unless you're in some like underground whisper network in Europe. But I did look at that as Lukasz has great kicks, closes distance well, backs guys up, then he can work his striking attack, and he will go body, head. He will mix it up that way, and that's what I like out of Lukasz Brzeski, the bull.
I do too, but that's the problem that I run into with this fight is, hey, Lukasz might have the more eye-catching talent. What he does is definitely more exciting. But what Martin Buday does with his forward pressure, his basic boxing, if we even want to call it that, and his overwhelming grappling, is kind of the perfect key to solve the riddle that is Lukasz. Because if Lukasz is able to stay at the heavyweight division, first of all, I'm curious to see if he stays in the heavyweight division, if I'm being honest. Kind of one of these tweeners, almost like a Chris Daukaus I look at. Like, I'm not going to say this outright, but like Chris Daukaus, if he really wanted to, could probably be a light heavyweight. And I only say that because
we thought that was the plan.
And Stipe Miocic in the past had talked about like, hey, I could probably make light heavyweight, and he's the greatest heavyweight of all time, and they're all sort of in that same frame. So I will be curious to see who they match Lukasz up with in his UFC career if he does stay around for a while, just because he is one of these weird tweeners in the division.
When it does come to these guys on Contender Series, Martin Buday fought Lorenzo Hood on Contender Series. Lorenzo had a little bit of success until he didn't, but Hood was also a Buday was also a minus 400 favorite against Hood. So both these guys were giant favorites in their matchups on Contender Series. But when we do look at this, I mean, for Buday, he fought the Ben Rothwell game plan against Chris Barnett that we assumed he would, and that looked good. That's been the game plan throughout all of Martin Buday's career except for one fight. Again, he was the former Octagon heavyweight champ. The one fight that he had where he didn't fight like he normally does was against Kamil Minda, who was a 36-year-old heavyweight a little over a year ago. And in that fight, Minda fought like Lukasz Brzeski fights and threw a ton of leg kicks in the first round. Buday doesn't check leg kicks. Buday couldn't figure out range. Buday got bloodied up. And then in the second round, Buday started to press a little bit of a pace, landed a jab, and Minda fell down, and that was the end of the fight. That's the only time I've seen Buday in a fight where I go, geez, that could cause me issues. And in this matchup, that's the one. This is the one.
I gotta be honest with you though, Buday does have a game that I think you can improve upon. Like, I don't think we have seen the finished product. And I agree with you. For the most part, he has fought in the same manner up until this point, but only 30 years of age in the heavyweight division, there's a long way to grow.
If Marcin Tybura, the Sergey Spivaks of the world, we move up into the rankings, Martin Buday is my guy because fights behind a jab, 1-2, throws an uppercut. He'll hit the body. He tries to go for the clinch, take you down. If he doesn't, he's just going to wear. He is a big body heavyweight, 264.5. So he is also brown belt in BJJ, so I'll give him that prop. And he was no-gi European champ at ultra heavyweight in 2013, 2015. So the jiu-jitsu is there if you want those credentials, but he doesn't have a lot of the answers for the kicks. And that kind of worries me against Brzeski that likes to start off hot and heavy with the kicks. So we look at the odds.
Can't get kicked when you're fighting a guy who's on his back, though.
We look at the odds in this one. Buday open minus 200, minus 248. Brzeski open plus 170, plus 195. I'm saying Lukasz Brzeski because that's how he said it in the preview for Dana White's Contender Series. I've heard it said a couple of different times. We look at the topology votes, Matt, in this one. I have no idea where they are. I think that they're going to be closer than the odds might suggest. So I'm going to say over under 70% Buday, because he did beat a fan favorite, Chris Barnett.
I was going to say 70% Buday, so I'll say over.
And it is over, so 690 total votes, 86% Buday, 31% by decision, 63% by knockout. For the 14% that are going with didn't he tap, Brzeski, 49% by decision, 43% by knockout. The top doesn't concern me, he's in the UFC anyway. The clomiphene is what it is. But when I look at this matchup, Matt, I like Martin Buday when he walks guys down, when he wears them out, and I think that's a game plan that's tailored to beat Brzeski. I've talked about the leg kicks. I can see a world where Brzeski lands a couple of those leg kicks, lead left hook, wings a right hand, and knocks out Buday, which is much easier said than done. But I do like Buday for the steadiness, and that's why I'm picking him in this fight.
I would rather pick a fight who is susceptible to getting leg kicked than pick a fighter who can get taken down against a very good wrestler. Because that's the thing. You get hit by a leg kick, it might suck really bad for those 5 seconds, but you're going to get past that in another 5. If you get taken down, there's not much you can do if you don't have a good game off your back or great takedown defense. And all the things I love about Lukasz, like, I think him against OSP at the heavyweight division, like, that'd be a fun fight. There are fights out there for him to have that would be very entertaining, but I do have a hard time seeing him match up, especially physically, against a lot of these bigger guys in the heavyweight division. So I agree with you. I do like Buday in this matchup, and I think it could be a fun one.
Both of us going with Slovakia's Badius Martin Buday to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section if Mark Smith made the right call. Let us know who you have in this fight. We have some big time matchups on this card, including Marlon Vera and Dominic Cruz at the top. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Coming up this weekend, a fight that will be at a catch weight of 120 pounds that was originally scheduled to take place on October 15th, but we're moving it up and we're giving Angela Hill a fight in her own backyard in Pachanga outside of
Good to see, though.
San Diego. She's going to be taking on the Mexican-Canadian Loopy Godinez, a fighter who I've just straight up dropped the main name for the nickname and gone with Loopy Godinez on the graphic because we can do crazy, kooky things at Fight Night Picks. I'm out for Lupita Godinez. It's been a mixed bag in the UFC, 3-2. In her last 2 fights, she's looked very good. Both of these women had great performances against Ariane Carnelosi and Loma Lookmanmi. So take that for what it's worth. But for Loopy, those are her last 2 fights. For Angela Hill, 25 women have tried. 12 have succeeded. We're going to figure out if she's a 500 hitter coming up this weekend. 13-12 is the overall record. 2 stints in the UFC. and 1-4 in her last 5 fights. Now, she did go on a tidy little 3-fight run in 2019-20. Carnelosi, Hannah Cyphers, and Loma Lookman the wins, but those fighters outside of the rankings. But the best part about Angela Hill, she's one of those fighters that usually turns it up when she takes on a bigger named opponent. I'm thinking like Michelle Watterson. I'm thinking like the Amanda Lemos fight where she gets dropped early, but then she rallies in it. Hill's always there as a litmus test, unfortunately. She is ranked in this division, so it's a good opportunity for Godinez, who's been training at Titan Athletics in British Columbia, Canada, Matt. So I do like this matchup. I could talk until the cows come home about this fight, but what's your overall take here?
I almost got violent with a friend of mine about a month ago because he looked at Matt Brown's record and said, this guy's a scrub. And if you know anything about me, you know that it's not. Like, look at the guys that we fought. They're very good. Angela Hill is cut from the exact same cloth as Matt Brown. You cannot look at 13-12 and think, wow, this is a fighter who barely belongs in the UFC, because when you do a deep dive on her record, you realize that all of her fights have taken place in the UFC, the biggest organization in the world, or Invicta, the biggest women's organization in the world. This isn't a fighter who fought in the regional scene for 10 fights and then came over to the UFC. Ever since she has had professional experience, it has been at the UFC level or Invicta, which for a lot of women's fighters is basically the UFC level, because in Invicta, you don't really defend your belt. You know what you do? You win the belt, then you go to the UFC basically immediately. Look at Chris Cyborg. There's a bunch of fighters. I'm not going to list them all off. But for Angela Hill, it just feels like a skill check for a lot of these fighters. Remember, we talked about this a lot when Yorgan de Castro fought Greg Hardy. Not a fight I thought I'd bring up today, but hear me out. We talked a lot about Greg Hardy. He's very green in MMA experience. We all know how good of an athlete he is, of course, coming from the NFL. We don't need to talk about the other stuff. Let's just talk about him as a fighter. Angela Hill is a unique skill test because hard to knock out, very difficult to finish, is good defensively and pretty much...
Really good takedown defense, except for her last fight.
Exactly. Great defensively in pretty much every aspect, and the only way to beat Angela Hill is to almost outthink her in the game. Like when Greg Hardy fought Yorgan de Castro, it was, hey, can you get past the leg kick skill check? It's something everybody has to do in their MMA career before you feel comfortable with them at a ranked level. And that's kind of why Angela Hill is one of the great litmus tests in the UFC, because if you beat her, we kind of know exactly where you fit in the division. You can deal with a volume striker, you can deal with someone who is good defensively, has good takedown defense, like you had mentioned, and has good cardio too, because cardio is one of the last things that comes into play for a lot of these great fighters. We see fighters work their way through unranked fighters, getting a lot of stoppages, a lot of finishes early on in fights, but we never know how good they look until they're in that 5-round kind of a fight, or they're in there with someone like Angela Hill, who can make a 3-round fight feel like a 5-round fight. I haven't looked at last weekend's main event. I was pretty confident Jamal Hill was going to win by knockout, look really good, and he did. But there were some, like, iffy spots in that fight for sure. And
I think Yuri Prochazka's feeling pretty good about that fight.
But I'm sure the champ feels good about every fight in this division in every division. But for Angela Hill, you know what she's going to bring into this cage, where really Lupita Godinez is the one who can change things up. I do think she is the more well-rounded mixed martial artist, but again, she is going to probably need a few takedowns against someone who is lauded for their takedown defense throughout their career.
You look at it for Godinez, she has the fight against Jessica Penne, loses by split decision, very close, so on and so forth. She does get a win, and then she takes a super short notice fight against a really, really tricky fighter in Luana Carolina, up a weight class, and she tries to put the wrestling shoes on, does great in the first round, and then gasses out in the second round. And there's a lot of different things that you can point to, but this is a stat that I found absolutely wild on Lupita Godinez. Women's strawweight division has been around for a while, right?
Has been. UFC 185 was the first title fight, official title fight between Carla Esparza and Joanna.
Lupita Godinez is already 5th all-time in women's strawweight history for takedowns landed. 21 of them. She's one behind Tatiana Suarez. That's crazy.
Tatiana has like 3 fights, though. It's almost crazier for Tatiana.
You don't have to neg the point, but when I do look at this one, Matt, for Godinez, it very much is a wrestle-heavy, grapple-heavy type of attack. And when you look at it when she's striking 1-2, 1-2, close the distance, the occasional leg kick, but it really is power over volume. It really is power into the takedowns, try and get you down to the mat, ground you out with the ground and pound. Submission or finish over position for Godinez, but it works out because she has a strong upper body. And if you do look at it in a matchup like this, Angela Hill, the last thing to go, we always say, is power. But her takedown defense has always been so darn good. Vina Janjidoba was able to kind of zap some of that in her last time out. Janjidoba with 3 takedowns. And Vina, a grappler, a lights-out jiu-jitsu artist, but not really known for her wrestling, even though she walks out with every joint sleeved up on her legs.
Angela Hill's gonna watch this video and be like, these guys think I have power at 37 years
No.
old?
I'm saying power is usually the last thing to go at 37. It's not in her case. In her case, it looked like her wrestling defense her last time out.
I agree with that rule for the most part, but I only apply that rule on fighters who weigh above 170 pounds. That's just how I normally do it. For Angela Hill, I do think her volume is going to be a very big trouble for Lupita Godinez, because I always go back to Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan. Aljamain would just throw a lot, and it would make Petr Yan cover up. And I do feel like there is a part of that fight in this fight to where Angela Hill's throwing so much volume that it's almost preventing Godinez from getting into a really good flow.
Like Carolina was able to do in the second round on.
Just with Carolina, I don't look at her as nearly as technical of a fighter as Angela Hill. With Angela Hill's on, she's got good front kicks, great volume, good Muay Thai combinations too, and a nice clinch game. And that's what I'm interested to see in this fight too, because their clinches are used in very different ways. Angela Hill offensively with knees and elbows, of course, whereas Godinez is going to use that clinch to try to initiate some of her scrambles and some of her own takedown attempts. So I think that's probably going to be the most interesting part of the fight. But I'm still curious to see how Godinez is able to get in of the striking range of Angela Hill, even though Angela Hill is at 37 years of age. So I do expect that output and that cardio to start to diminish over time.
Backyard fight for Hill. She's on a 3-fight losing streak. She's a plus 200 underdog. Godinez minus 250. This fight was moved around on short notice. Over under on this fight. The Topology votes, surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 75% Godinez.
I'll say under slightly, but she'll be the favorite. Not at all.
541 total votes, 85% Godinez, 85% have her to win by decision. For the 15% that have Angela Hill, 86% by decision. I mean, listen, kind of a close, San Diego, you're going to get a pop for either fighter, I would assume.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think Angela Hill's going to get a big pop from the crowd? Because I think she will, honestly. I genuinely think her and Dominic Cruz
Yeah, she's a
are gonna be the
transplant
loudest
East
ones.
Coast to Alliance, so
Been
there
there for a
is
long
that.
time, too.
I think Loopy Godinez gets the win in this matchup. I think the wrestling advantage is there. I like the motor on Godinez. I like it at 115. I like a full training camp. But this fight's actually at 120 pounds. Remember that. It's not actually at 115 because this one was scheduled for October and then they moved it sooner. I don't really know why they did it. They just rescheduled it. So if somebody wants to drop that bit of nugget down in the comments section, help with the B-Dubs facts, no sponsor. I do like Godinez in this matchup. Again, clinch work will be fun, but I think for Godinez, she utilized the clinch work to drop levels to try and take you down. I think she'll do it this weekend. I could be proven wrong, but I do have Loopy here.
I also like Lupita Godinez in this matchup, but I'll be honest, Angela Hill is a uniquely poor matchup for her in the rankings because, again, she can just throw a lot, and if you're throwing a lot of volume, you're normally forcing your opponent to be in a defensive shell. Think of Rory McDonald versus Jake Ellenberger. Again, not a fight I thought I'd bring up today, but Rory McDonald outthought Jake Ellenberger, really put him in a defensive shell, and I do feel like the striking output of Angela Hill can do that to opponents, but she's a little bit long in the tooth at this stage of her career, so I do like and favor the younger and less experienced, but also I feel like more well-rounded Lupita Godinez.
Both of us going with the Mexican-Canadian Lupita Godinez to get the win in this fight at 120 pounds. The old catchweight. UFC doesn't like putting those on, but they're doing it this weekend. Big-time main event. Fellow Alliance teammate to Angela Hill, Dominic Cruz, the former bantamweight GOAT with WEC and the UFC, taking on a surging prime Cheeto Marlon Vera. Can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Coming up this weekend, Gerald Meerschaert submits Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva knocks out Gerald Meerschaert. I think that's what happened. I could be right. I could be wrong. But when we do look at this matchup, Matt, a really fun one at middleweight. And for Gerald Meerschaert, has records in this division. All-time records. Tied for third, all-time, with most finishes in the division at 9. He's tied with Derek Brunson, Chris Lieben, the Crippler, and Nate Marquardt, a nickname that doesn't really withstand the strength of time.
Nate the Great?
Division leader, I meant more for Chris Lieben, is 11, Anderson Silva, but he is number 1 all-time with most submissions in this division. He has 9 finishes. 8 of them are by submission. And listen, Damian Maia is in second place at 5 all-time. And people might not think Damian Maia the middleweight, but remember, he did challenge for the belt against Anderson Silva.
Abu Dhabi.
And just an absolute stinker. Dana White cast off this Anderson Silva. We don't need him anymore. He's boring. But when it does come to this matchup, Gerald Meerschaert has beaten a very, very similar opponent. Was not an easy road, but he did beat Mahmoud Muradov, where they went strike for strike, tit for tat. Muradov looked great in the first round. The money team's own And then in the second round, he had no gas left, and Gerald Meerschaert took over.
And that was the problem with that fight, and that's sort of what Gerald Meerschaert does to everybody who's better than him at striking. Because, spoiler alert, most guys in the middleweight division can outstrike Gerald Meerschaert, but that's not what MMA is about. If it was just striking, we'd be watching Glory Kickboxing and not MMA. What Gerald Meerschaert's really good at doing is finding out the exact point that you get tired at, and then he puts it on you. And honestly, I really like that from Gerald Meerschaert, because he's a lot more terrifying of a fighter than you would probably think looking at GM3. He's 34-15, kind of a salty record. He's been in there a lot, been
He beat
finished.
Jay Ellis. He lost to Jay Ellis.
But something that Chael Sonnen always says, and it really stands out in my mind, is MMA fighters aren't necessarily afraid of losing. It happens. It's part of the sport. This isn't boxing. You don't have to be undefeated. Every MMA fighter is afraid of being exhausted in the cage, though, because it doesn't matter how good you are technically. If you have no cardio, if you are at the brink of what you have in your gas tank, none of that other stuff matters, and your opponent, if they have a better gas tank or cardio than you do, can kind of put the fight wherever they want to. And Gerald Meerschaert has made a career off of doing that, and that's why I always love watching a Gerald Meerschaert fight, because that's what you said. He's going to eat some big power shots, he might get knocked out, he might not.
Might be 15 seconds
Exactly.
against Azamat.
But if it doesn't happen, he's going to drag you into those deep waters like Jason Voorhees, and he's going to be able to submit you. But here's the thing about Bruno Silva that has really gone unnoticed, I feel like. What did Alex Pereira do to Sean Strickland, the 4th-ranked fighter in the division, the last time they fought? He hit him with one shot, put him down, hit him with another shot that put him away. Bruno ate some of the, cleanest shots I've ever seen on the feet in the middleweight division, and landed his own against a great striker, too. And I think that's a big deal going into this fight, because Bruno Silva showed a grappling side of his, just MMA career.
Which he said he wasn't going to do, by the way.
But you know what I like? Even though he didn't have a ton of success with it, I know it's there. And I do think Bruno Silva, do I think he can grapple with Gerald Meerschaert? Not at all. I'm not an idiot. But I think he can go through a couple bad positions and show a good gas tank, because that's the last thing. Bruno Silva didn't fall off a cliff with his cardio in the 3rd round of that fight with Pereira. It was a very high output fight where both guys were landing a lot of big power shots, and Bruno Silva was eating bombs on the feet. I think Silva's going to be able to fight this fight a lot more at his own pace, which will prevent him from tiring out in the 3rd round. But like you said with the Murzakanov fight, we've seen Gerald Meerschaert go up against power punches, who are supposed to knock him out early, who are supposed to kind of make a career off of GM3. You know what Gerald Meerschaert says? Nuh-uh. None of that. I'm going to be old, I'm going to be good at grappling, and I'm going to submit you.
And then we saw him fight Krzysztof Jotko, in a fight where Jotko was able to take him down and control parts of that fight on the ground. Whoever thought a kickboxer was going to do that?
I gotta be honest, do you know what fight that I always go to when I start to worry about Gerald Meerschaert on the feet? It's the Ian Heinisch matchup. Because here's the thing, you get knocked out by Khamzat Chimaev, I don't care. Khamzat's awesome. At middleweight, at welterweight, he's very, very good no matter what weight class he's at.
Bangkok ready Heinisch.
Ian Heinisch puts in his Twitter bio that he's a top 25 fighter in the UFC to sell cryptocurrencies. I don't necessarily... You can look at his bio right now. I'm a top 20 fighter, MRI, there's all this stuff with crypto, people gotta get out of my DMs. Gerald Meerschaert in that fight did not look comfortable on the feet, and that's what I'm worried about with Meerschaert. It feels like when he's ready, when he's on, he can eat those power shots. He understands that, okay, I'm gonna have to eat those power shots to then get through the 2nd and 3rd round and hopefully get a finish. With Bruno Silva, though, he has decent takedown defense. He has a good gas tank, maybe not great gas tank. I would say good takedown defense against guys with the takedowns of Gerald Meerschaert. Let me clarify that. But
El Dierte rinsed and repeated until Bruno Silva was able to do the Gerald Meerschaert, but on the feet.
Here's the thing, though. El Dierte did that to Anthony Smith, who then went on to fight for a UFC title. So Sanchez can do that to anybody in the UFC, and he still got knocked out at the end. So that's the big thing about Silva. He doesn't have a lot of the pitfalls that traditionally these power punchers have at this division. Do I think he has great 5-round cardio against a guy like Paulo Costa or Marvin Vettori? Well, no, that's kind of a ridiculous statement to make. But I think this is a very fun fight for the fans. I think it's a fight that could go either way, but I don't know how Gerald Meerschaert's going to have an answer for the pure striking of Bruno Silva.
The awkward thing for me, if you've been following along with the channel for a long time, I've been a big Bruno Silva guy since before he was in the UFC, M1 Global Champ.
These guys.
I thought Artem Frolov was going to be a big deal in the UFC, and then Bruno Silva starched him. And then Silva was out, the USADA issues, he makes his UFC debut, he fights his former teammate Wellington Turman, finishes him, they play touch button on the park, or touch button in the park on the ground. He finishes Andrew Sanchez after... I'm sitting there Louis smoking in that fight if we just keep making those references.
Andrew Sanchez has done that to a lot of good fighters.
Yeah, but you're so puckered up where Bruno Silva just takedown, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. There's no takedown defense. He has no answer, and Silva was a pretty big favorite in that fight. Then finally in the 3rd round, he gets the finish. He then goes out and fights Jordan Wright. They go strike for strike. He knocks out Jordan Wright. And then his last time out takes on Alex Pereira, where people were like, okay, Pereira at this time's what, 3-1? This is a former round one global champ, but Pereira's favored to win. We picked Pereira to win. He did get the win.
He's pretty good, guys.
I still have high damn hopes for Bruno Silva. So Pereira's going to fight for the title at UFC 281. I think Silva beats Gerald Meerschaert in this fight. Obviously, the threat of the takedown, the fact that Gerald Meerschaert's broken his bubble of Rufus Sport. He's trained at Fusion XL, but for this camp at Sanford MMA with one Ian Heinisch, he's at that gym now too. So good opportunities for Gerald Meerschaert to try and shore up a little bit of the striking, maybe mitigate some of those times where he's standing there with his hands out and his head up and he doesn't move it. So good opportunity for Gerald Meerschaert. Very much a pro Meerschaert channel ever since he fought
submission specialist.
Ryan James back in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. The odds, Meerschaert open plus 170, plus 220 or thereabouts now. Silva opened minus 200. Blindado minus 280. Over under, Matt, on Tapology. The fan vote is a surprise to us. It is to you. I'm going to say over under 80% Bruno Silva.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It is over. Just kind of a surprise. I'll be honest. I set that high and I was hoping it was going to be under.
I thought it'd be like 95 just because of the knockout prowess of Silva.
744 total votes. 88% Silva. 87% by knockout. For those 13% that have Meerschaert, 73% by knockout. Or sorry, by submission. That'd be wild if it was by knockout. Yeah, I think Bruno Silva wins this fight. Would I be surprised if Meerschaert takes a leg home to put on his mantle? Because he's probably...
A leg a little bit.
Yeah, he's probably a leg man. Like, the father in Christmas Carol.
He's a choke man for
just
sure.
That leg lantern, like a thigh. But for me, I do have Bruno Silva here. I don't love the takedown defense, but keeping it on the feet, keeping a pace, I think Silva can do it. I've seen it before. I have him here.
Algerte's wrestled a lot of guys. The fact that Bruno Silva has shown the ability to keep his power late into fights gives me a little bit more confidence. I know a lot of people are down on a performance like that because Algerte, who cares? But again, if you go back and watch a lot of Andrew Sanchez's fights, he was able to out-wrestle a lot of top-level fighters in the UFC. The problem was, it wasn't sustainable. He'd out-wrestle you for 2 rounds, become a striker in the 3rd round, and we kind of all saw what happened when he became a striker in the 3rd round against Silva. I think this is going to be an incredible fight because, again, Meerschaert's not the type of guy who's going to go down from one punch. I know you can look at the Hamzat fight, know we one punched him, but still, I think Meerschaert does have a good enough chin to make this fight competitive and interesting. I do think we'll learn a lot about Bruno Silva in this matchup, and like you said, I agree. I think Bruno Silva's probably going to get the win. He will get the win. That'll be the prediction. But he's got to get after it at a certain point. Like at 33 years of age.
I think he is right now, Matt.
Does Gerald Meerschaert get you that close to the rankings, though?
Yeah, I think he does. After you just fought Alex Pereira, you beat Meerschaert, and then you fight like Kelvin Gastelum.
That's all. I'm just saying, Meerschaert's coming off a loss, so maybe to me, I don't necessarily think that this is the win that gets you in the rankings. You can argue against that. I would agree with you if you can make a good enough point, but I do still like Bruno Silva. I just feel like after this fight, a Brad Tavares would be a fun opponent next, maybe. Just one of those guys in that 10 to 15 kind of range that would really teach us a lot more about Silva, because the fact that you had a very competitive fight, a very fun fight with a guy who's now fighting for the title, makes me want to see more of you against the highest levels of competition. So I like Silva this weekend, but I'm very curious to see where this gets him.
Great opportunity for both of these men. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Both of us going with Brazil's Blindado, Bruno Silva to get the win. Big time main event on the way. Marlon Vera taking on Dominic Cruz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.
That girl's nasty.
Coming up this weekend, in a bout that was originally scheduled for UFC Fight Night, Rafael versus Rafael, we have Nina Nunes taking on that girl's nasty, Cynthia Calvillo. And Matt, we talked about this fight, what was it, a month ago? A couple of months ago? Yeah. It seems like it was a little bit ago, but originally it was due July 9th. And Nina Nunes out of that bout. There was some rumblings of a stomach virus. So now it gets booked in August, and it gets booked for California. So it should be an interesting matchup. Obviously for Cynthia Calvillo, large majority of her career has been spent training, living in California, a little bit of a stint at Extreme Couture. For Nina Nunes, champ camp with the Lioness. She's back, she's got the belt, and for Nina, looking to make some moves at flyweight now. So we talked about this fight early July. We're going to throw it back to that original prediction. We're going to update the odds and give you a final pick on this pairing. We have a fight at flyweight, yes, flyweight, between former ranked strawweights. It's Nina Nunes, formerly Ansarov, taking on Cynthia Calvillo. And yes, that girl was nasty when she was on her way up, and she was 9-1-1 at one point. And now the record is 9-4-1.
She beat Pearl Gonzalez.
Yeah, and she did
Trailblazer.
very well. That was that girl's nasty soundbite. That's what that fight was. But if you look at it in her last 3 fights, a loss to Katlyn Chookagian, she couldn't get it going. A loss to Jessica Andrade by finish. And then a couple of months after that, she fought Andrea Lee and got retired on the stool at the end of the second round. So for Cynthia Calvillo, maybe you think her best days are behind her. She's a few days away from her 35th birthday, so happy early birthday to Cynthia Calvillo. She's going to be taking on Nina Nunes, who's almost 37 years old and hasn't won a fight in 3.5 years when she beat Claudia Gadelha. Before that, I went over Randa Marcos. Before that, I went over Angela Hill. And if you do look at it, the loss that Nina Nunes had before she went away, had the kid, then made the comeback against Mackenzie Dern that did not go all that well, but it was way too soon, was a fight against Tatiana Suarez where she lost the first round convincingly, lost the second round convincingly, won the third round. She came back in that one. So a good sign from Nina Nunes. You like that resolve. But in this fight, Matt, if somebody says, hey, like that kid from Recess, Russell, was it Russell? Opens his jacket and he's got all these wares for sale and the person goes, hey, I'm going to tell you who's going to win. I know exactly. Cynthia Calvillo, Nina Nunes. We each went 10-1 last weekend, and I have no fucking clue who's going to win this fight this weekend.
It's not a good fight. Let's just call it what it is. Cynthia Calvillo's quit in 2 straight fights pretty much, and Nina Nunes hasn't looked good in a meaningful period of time. Like, for Nunes, it's not even her fault completely, because she fought Tatiana Suarez, who at one point was like Zion Williamson, almost too good for her own good, and her body failed her because she was so talented. It's kind of wild. Like, Jacob deGrom is probably the best comp for Tatiana Suarez. Like, he's such a good pitcher, his body can't withstand how good he is.
To me, it's like Sean Alexander, the lost star of the Seattle Seahawks in the early 2000s.
I don't know who that is, but okay. For Nina Nunes, she could look really good. And again, on her best day, we know how talented of a fighter that she is. But after she had her kid, and the fact that she is 36 years old, she's had a pretty long career too. That's the wild thing about both these fighters. Just look at it on Tapology, it like reminded me, oh yeah, Cynthia Calvillo is almost 35 years old because she was very young in her career and she was pushed quite heavily at the beginning because I remember there was a stat that came out. She fought at UFC 209 and then 210. She was the first fighter since Tito Ortiz to fight on back-to-back pay-per-views since it was like 18 years or whatever. It was a wild turnaround that she had between those 2 cards. And then it just never really worked out for her. I remember the Carla Esparza fight was considered very controversial at the time, but I really did think Carla had done enough with her own offensive grappling to stifle the attack of Cynthia Calvillo. And ever since we've seen that if Calvillo can't get her own offensive takedown, she really does struggle on the feet against pressure fighters. And you might look at her win over Jessica Eye and say, oh, well, Jessica Eye is a pressure fighter. But Jessica Eye was never really in that fight. And she wasn't dedicated to that game plan of, hey, I'm going to get on the inside and really make my opponent pay for their kind of range misuse. Excuse me. Calvillo looked great in that performance, but the problem was, it's almost like she got the big opportunity, and then she felt like she had won after that. Like, for me, Calvillo, when beating Jessica Eye, seemed like when teams make a big deal when they win in, like, the second round of the playoffs. It's good. It's a good building block. But to quote Kobe Bryant, work's not done yet. And for Cynthia Calvillo, I don't know if we've really seen the improvements after she was able to win that one big opportunity.
I don't know if we've seen anything different all the way through. That's the trouble for me. I mean, Cynthia Calvillo's trained at AKA, and that was a big deal. She trained at Team Alpha Male. That was a big deal. Then when she left there, she went to Extreme Couture. That was made a big deal of. Well, now she's a Syndicate MMA. Like, it has been mixing, moving, but we haven't really seen giant leaps and bounds of growth in her game. So you look at the fight against Katlyn Chookagian, and I say, okay, well, that's the perennial #1 contender in this division. When you have a win over Jessica Eye, who at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was the 5th-ranked flyweight, that's a good win. Like, that's a good win to have on your record. But she wasn't ready for Chookagian. Then when she went out there against Andrade, she wasn't ready for that. And then between the Andrade fight and the fight against Andrea Lee, there was a 2-month gap. That's way too soon. So she came back against Andrea Lee, couldn't get any of her own takedowns, and she was a sitting duck on the feet. So that is the trouble when you look at this fight. Nina Nunes has good takedown defense. Obviously, we talked about it. Tatiana Suarez took her down round 1, round 2. Some fighters have taken her down, sure. But when you look at Nunes, historically good in her takedown defense and very good when she makes her strikes count on the feet. That's the way that Nunes could win this fight. If Calvillo can't get the takedown, Nunes has been historically the better striker.
No, you're 100% right, and on paper, I would agree with that 100%. I just don't know what version of Nunes we're going to get, and I don't know what version of Calvillo we're going to get either, because there is a clear path of, okay, Calvillo gets on top, submits her in the first round, and wow, Cynthia looks great. There's also another world where Nina Nunes just defends 7 takedowns, boxes her ears in, and wins like a 30-26 because the third round is so one-sided. The one big X factor I do think for both fighters, though, is the fact that Nunes has far better cardio than Cynthia Calvillo. Even though Calvillo has had that 5-round experience at the UFC level, I don't think she can manage her own output and her cardio to the level that a Nina Nunes can, because as long as Nunes is in a 15-minute fight, she can just keep on throwing and not really have to worry about, taking a minute or two off throughout the fight. So I do think Nunes, if she can keep this fight on the feet, is going to have a massive advantage, because for Calvillo, Andrea Lee's not the hardest puncher in the world. And this is why, when Amanda Nunes tapped out so fast against Juliana Pena, I was kind of hard on her, because she got tired, got into a hard fight, and then kind of gave up the second she was in a hard fight. The reason I think the world of Alexander Volkanovski is, he gets into a hard fight, says, that's cool and all. This, I'm a champion. This is why I'm built from this stuff. For Calvillo, it's just so disheartening when you see an MMA fighter, or a fighter in general, who's kind of built up on these principles to look for an easy way out in her last fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole conversation around Charles Oliveira. Now he's your lightweight champ.
The difference is, though, Charles Oliveira went on a 7-fight win streak and finished everybody.
And this could very well be the start. So, in the rebooking, Cynthia Calvillo open a -140 favorite, -160 right now, and consequently, for Nina Nunes, opened at a +120, +135, or thereabouts. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. The most slipped as I was on this page, so it's not as much a surprise to us as it is to you, but we'll throw it on over there nonetheless. 610 total votes, 70% Calvillo, 89% by decision for the 30% that have Nunes, 92% by decision. So, majority of the fans have both fighters, I guess, to win by decision. Majority have Calvillo to get the win. When we made this original prediction video, we were in agreement on the pick, if I'm not mistaken, both going with Calvillo. Any change of the pick? Any differing of the thoughts?
This is a very tough fight to predict, I'm not going to lie, because let's be honest, neither fighters look great as of late, so it is really difficult to figure out, okay, where are they going to start from, and what version of each fighter are we going to get? Because for Nunes, she looked great in that fight against Tatiana Suarez, and I understand a lot of you guys right now are going, who the hell is Tatiana Suarez? But,
or how the hell did she look good? Third round, she looked great.
I bet you people don't even know who Suarez is at this stage of her career, for being honest.
If they watch Food Truck Diaries, they do.
So nobody knows who Tatiana Suarez is. Probably the best fighter to ever fight in this division, to never even fight for a title. One of the most dominant wrestlers we have ever seen in the women's strawweight division. I know this fight's a flyweight, but still, humor me for a second. Tatiana Suarez was that kind of a fighter at strawweight. And Nina Nunes, Nina... Well, I don't even remember.
Answer off at the time.
Thank you. Looked really good in that fight, and understandably, she lost. She lost the first 2 rounds, but she was able to rally in that 3rd round. That's the one good thing about Nina Nunes. I'm never really worried about where her gas tank is going to be, because for the most part, she always just kind of fights like a different shade of herself. And that's something I appreciate. Whereas, I think Calvillo probably has the higher ceiling of both these fighters, but the problem is, I have no idea where she is in her MMA career at this point. At one point, she was one of the big stars, the turn of the century, if you will. After UFC 200, there weren't a lot of female stars in the UFC. There was Amanda Nunes, who had just beat the brakes off Ronda Rousey. Ronda was kind of in limbo. Holly Holm was out there, but we all kind of know how her career went after she lost the title. She had quite a few losses, so a lot of people put stock into Cynthia Calvillo, myself included, but when she did make her weight change up to flyweight, the results definitely were not what she was expecting. I feel very easy to say that. So, ever so slightly, I'm still going to stay with the Cynthia Calvillo pick, because I liked it the first time around. Nina Nunes, the one who has more question marks of anything going into this fight. But I think this is as tough of a fight as any on the card to predict, because again, I have no idea where either one of these fighters are in their overall MMA careers.
Both fighters are, aging. They're on their Augusto Sakai. They both have losing streaks. It really is a tricky one. I like all the parts of Calvillo's game when it comes to the wrestling, the grappling. When it comes to Nina Nunes, obviously, much pure striker.
Oh, yeah.
We know this. We've seen this. There's
Good
a long
volume.
history of it. But when we go back to both of these fighters and we look at the wins for Nunes, her last win 3.5 years ago for Cynthia Calvillo, who, from the original booking to now, turned 35, she won against Jessica Ai 2 years ago. So both of us going with Calvillo in this matchup. Let us know down below in the comments section. Do you have the champ camp? Do you have Calvillo? It's going to be a fun one. Big strawweight matchup this weekend. Yeah. Angela Hill taking on Lupita Godinez. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. It took the professional Azamat Murzakanov 1 fight in the UFC to earn a performance bonus his last time out when he took on a tricky fighter in Tafon Chukwe, but he did just that. Flying knee knockout in the third round of that matchup when he was already down 2-0 and it looked like there was nothing left in the tank. By gosh golly darn it, didn't Azamat have a little bit left? You love to see that. He's taking on a guy who's been there and done that in Devin Clark, the Brown Bear. Another camp out of Elevation Fight Team for Devin Clark, and apparently they turned a switch that made him mean, because last time out against William Knight, he brutalized William Knight. Now, I'm going to set this fight up this one way. The fans don't know this is coming, and you don't either. Has there ever been a Devin Clark fight where he wasn't bleeding from his teeth?
Never. He's gotten teeth knocked out. He's gotten teeth knocked down, but not out. Like, you're right. There has been a weird trend of mouth injuries with Devin Clark throughout his UFC career.
His teeth, they're made of just regular chiclets or Thrills gum that you pick up at the Dollarama.
Never been in a boring one, though.
There's a reference for you Canadians. Do you like soap-flavored gum? I used to sometimes playing ball. But when you do look at this matchup, Matt, for Azamat Murzakanov, the professional, former Brave CF openweight champion over there, he wins over some big-time names that you will recognize. Obviously, Mohamed Fakhradinov. Exactly. You know him over there with PFL, because they signed him. They're just doing weird things. He got the win over Mateusz Scheffel that you know from the PFL. He got that win on Dana White's Contender Series. Guto Innocente as well. But those guys over with Brave outweighed Azamat Murzakanov by a lot. And even in his fight against Tafon Chukwe and Mateusz Scheffel, I look at Murzakanov as, you're really a light heavyweight? Like, really? He doesn't look that big.
He does move well for the division, though, and I feel like that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, and I'll openly admit that,
I would hope it does.
But no, like, sometimes being small is a huge advantage, and I'm gonna bring it back to boxing. People hate it when I do this, but
not
still.
in the porn industry, unless it is.
Okay, we'll just let that one sit, and we'll let the fans take that for what it is. In boxing, though, really easy to move up and down divisions because there's no grappling. You don't have to deal with the weight of your opponent on top of you. It really comes down to speed and technique more than anything. So if you move up a division, you might have less power, but you definitely have more speed. You're probably more technical. Like, if I ask people right now who's more technical, Piotr Yan or Francis Ngannou?
Depends.
Everyone in the world's going to tell me Piotr Yan. I don't think many people would say Francis, even though they're equally effective in their MMA outcome. With Murzakanov, you're right. He is sort of compact for this division, but I do feel like he uses it to his benefit because he does have that speed X factor that we don't often see in the light heavyweight division. And this is the other thing I was going to ask you. We have long said, I guess now Dustin Jacoby's in the rankings, so we can't anymore. He was like the 16th ranked light heavyweight for years. It was, hey, if you beat him, you're ranked. If he beats you, he's probably not ranked, but if he wins like 3 in a row, he will be. Devin Clark right now holds that position. I feel like in the greater scope of MMA fans, or UFC fans in particular, Devin Clark does have quite a bit of stock, even though at the UFC level, especially against the highest level of opponents, he hasn't necessarily been able to show that. Against unranked fighters, Devin Clark is as good as most of them, but he does normally struggle when he then has that next step up to face sort of the more experienced opponents at the UFC level.
Like, if you don't believe us, he comes into the UFC after being the RFA champ.
Blachowicz, guys.
Loses to Alex Nicholson. Okay, whatever. Alex Nicholson can knock out guys. That's fair. It was his only win in the UFC. He went 1-3. He beats Josh Stansbury, a guy you've never heard of unless you're Josh Stansbury or his friend or his family. And I apologize, Josh. It's the facts, though. It's been a while. He beats Jake Collier, which is a win that ages well.
Good win, exactly.
How well Collier's made out at heavyweight and how good he was at middleweight. He loses to Blachowicz, beats Mike Rodriguez, loses to Rakic, beats Darko Stasic, loses to Ryan Spann, beats Daquan Townsend, beats Alonzo Menafield in a fight that was terrible, loses to Anthony Smith in a weird fight that I don't think we needed.
Main event 3-round, yeah.
Main event, that one was 5.
Was it? Okay, I couldn't remember.
Loses to Iwan Kutsalaba, the one against Rakic. That Rakic-Smith was a 3-round main event.
I thought they both were for some reason.
Loses to Kutsalaba, beats William Knight. The fight against Iwan Kutsalaba gets out-wrestled, and if I'm not mistaken, he got dropped in that fight.
His teeth knocked down.
Yeah, even though it was a lot of back and forth. But Devin Clark has only lost to good guys or around the rankings guys that have been ranked, and Alex Nicholson. For Azamat Murzakanov, supposed to be in the UFC in 2017, was booked in a fight with Joachim Christensen. USADA came a-knocking, and that's why it took him a few extra years.
That would have been a tough fight for Christensen, if we're being honest.
Would have been a tough fight. For Azamat Murzakanov, when he was fighting outside of the UFC and Contender Series, fast twitch, very quick in these fights, backing you up with kicks, we talk uppercut in the clinch. Azamat Murzakanov's uppercut in the clinch, disgusting. Against Mateusz Scheffel, 2.5 minutes of nothing until he knocks him out. Against Tafon Chukwe, throwing wild stuff in the first round, not landing much. Second round, his hands are starting to drop. Third round, he looks like he's completely out of anything that he had. And then he just walks across. Brandon Jenkins, what was his name? He was in the UFC, the guy that he beat. Jacob Kilburn over with PFL. He gets a flying knee knockout. He grabs his head, walks across, and throws his knee up and knocks him out, and everybody went nuts. That was Azamat Murzakanov against Stefan Chukwueze for me. It's like, what? Really?
I thought it was awesome, though.
I was entertained, but really? That was what it took. Tefan was in front so big, and Azamat was a big favorite in the matchup. It did surprise me. For Devin Clark, he got stuck in a guillotine, a couple of them against William Knight, where he went, wow, how did he not tap?
And that's been my problem with Devin Clark. When you want to talk about the positives, he has good boxing, but not great boxing. I love the leg kicks out of him.
Better.
Devin Clark's legs are as thick as my torso, though. Like, I'm not afraid to say that whatsoever. This man walks around on tree trunks, and I always do feel like the leg kicks of Clark are going to be a big X factor in the majority of his matchups at this weight class. Now, I will be curious to see, because Devin Clark in his last fight fought a guy who basically weighed in at the limit of heavyweight in
251 for William Knight, and it was like, what, 220, 223 for Devin Clark.
Exactly. Devin Clark kind of weighed in at what you would expect for a light heavyweight weighing in at heavyweight. You don't expect him to be a 240, a 250, a 260 type of fighter, but Clark showed that he was able to fight a guy much bigger than him and had great success in that fight, so I'm curious to see how he does against sort of the opposite. Like, yes, you probably hit harder than Murzakanov, but now you have to adjust yourself for his speed advantage over you. And I do feel like the leg kicks of Devin Clark are going to be very important, because if he can slow down some of that explosiveness from Murzakanov on the outside, I do think it will hurt some of the big bursts that Azamat can have in this fight. And I'm very curious to see who shoots for the first takedown, because Devin Clark has great wrestling, but like you brought up, and I'm very glad you did, it's good wrestling, maybe just shy of great.
Two-time JUCO All-American Wrestling for the Brown Bear, for the professional Master of Sport in hand-to-hand combat.
But what I really like out of Devin Clark is he's great with his offensive takedowns. The problem is he can get caught in tricky positions every now and then. Against Anthony Smith, he showed that. There was a grappling exchange, and before you know it, Anthony Smith has a triangle choke.
He's got William Knight's back, and there's like 15 seconds left in the round. Knight chucks him off, gets his back, and then just starts hitting him.
It's almost like if you saw James Harden on a bad shooting night. You're like, what the hell does this guy even do to begin with? Now, if you see him on a good shooting night, you're like, wait, he might be the best player in the NBA. But for Devin Clark, it really does come down to how can he accentuate his strengths in the cage. And I'll be honest, I always like watching a Devin Clark fight. I'm not ashamed to say it.
Just dirty, you're eating a bucket of chicken, you're sitting there going, hey, bigger is better.
I'm not a Brown Bear apologist, but I'm bordering on one, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, Devin Clark's the underdog in this matchup at a plus 150. Azamat Murzakanov, minus 175, the favorite. We have a look at the fan vote over on Topology, Matt. This is, I have no idea where it's gonna be, and this is the one where I think it's gonna be the most contentious. I'm going to say over-under. There's a lot of Murzakanov fans out there. Over-under 80% Murzakanov.
I was thinking 65 for him, so I'll say under, but it'll be the favorite.
729 total votes. 77% Murzakanov, 78% by knockout. For the 23% that have Clark, 77% by decision. Matt, I took the motor to win the Ultimate Fighter at heavyweight based on his power. I'm taking Brown Bear to win this fight. Based on his wrestling ability, I think he's the less, this is going to sound so stupid, don't clip this, the less old-looking guy at 32 versus the 33-year-old Azamat Murzakanov. I wasn't, I liked the finish he had against Scheffel, but before that, there was a lot of nothing. I didn't like anything I saw until the knockout that he had against Chukwueze. For those reasons, I like Devin Clark. I like the camp change to elevation. I like the cardio that he had at heavyweight against William Knight. I like the wrestling. I like the clinch work. Usually some of these things, they benefit Azamat Murzakanov. I think in this matchup, they're going to benefit Devin Clark. Has Clark been chin checked before? 100%, folks. And I know there's a lot of people that like Murzakanov because he is the shiny new toy. He is undefeated. He does have the finishes.
And a fun fighter.
I like Devin Clark in this matchup. I could be talked either way, but I do like Clark here.
Murzakinov's last fight reminded me a lot of the career of Marcos Maidana. And I know I spent a lot of this talking about boxers that I like that half of you probably don't know. Danny Garcia, Marcos Maidana. Maidana would knock people dead in the 12th round, though, of fights that he lost every single round in. He would get dropped, he'd get hurt to the body, he would get out-volumed, and then all of a sudden, he would land an overhand right from Argentina.
Like Aaron Rodgers in 2015 throwing that Hail Mary.
I don't think Aaron Rodgers has any idea who Marcos Maidana is. If you sat him down and you were like, Aaron, do you know who Maidana is? He'd probably be like, who are you? Get out of here.
Where's the playbook?
This is the thing, though. I do agree with you. I like the underdog in this matchup in Devin Clark, mainly for his wrestling background that I feel like isn't talked about enough. He's someone who... This is the only thing that I don't like about Devin Clark. He doesn't make adjustments on the fly all that well. I know we're going to talk a lot about Marlon Vera, Dominic Cruz later on in the main event. Those are two guys who do not need their coaches to tell them to make improvements. They can do it on the fly. They can make mid-game adjustments. Whereas for Devin Clark, it feels like, hey, when the going's going good, he will have a lot of success and he can ride that success. But when he does start to get into a tough fight where it takes him out of his game plan, he can struggle. So I could see a world where he struggles with the wrestling early on and Murzakanov is able to hit him with some power shots. But I agree with the breakdown. I do like Devin Clark for his well-rounded skill set, but I think this is as fun of a fight on the card as any other.
Should be a big-time fight. There's a lot of Fight Night Picks fans that are fans of the professional Azamat Murzakanov. Let us know in this matchup who you have down below in the comment section. Should be a great one. Big-time main card. Holy smokes. David Onama? Nate Landwehr? What? Where? Who? And in the main event, Marlon Vera, Dominic Cruz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Like July's main event, it was the supremacy of the first names. We had Rafael versus Rafael. Coming up this weekend, both making the respective UFC debuts at strawweight. We have Mexico's Yasmin Jauregui taking on Brazil's Yasmin Lucindo. And Matt, when I look at this fight, I've watched a lot of tape, obviously, on both these fighters, but my point being is, watched a lot of combate for Jauregui, and when I was watching it, they called her Jasmine, they called her Yasmin, they call her Yasmin. I'm going to call her Jauregui, and she's taking on Lucindo. Jauregui, Lucindo.
Lucindo.
That's how we don't get it mixed up. So, for the fighter out of Tijuana, Mexico, coming out of Entram Gym, and she is a very, very interesting prospect. Made her MMA debut at 18, or rather 19, which is kind of crazy to see. Not as crazy as her opponents, because she made her debut way younger. But when you do look at it for Jauregui, she's 23, really rounding out into her own. 2021 Combate Tournament Champion. You love to see that. Campbell McLaren goes insane in those promos.
Does he ever?
And they get me excited. And then I go, hey, in Canada, how do I watch Combate again? Oh, it's really hard. Oh, to find these clips, I have to go on Facebook? Oh, so it's for my grandmother? My grandmother's watching Combate?
I mean, she watched Ferguson versus Pettis. That's a pretty famous story at this point, so maybe.
Went to bed ahead of Habib McGregor. But when I do watch Jauregui, you do look at her in the Combate tournament. They have it as 3-round fights over with Tapology.
The old Phoenix series, isn't it, though?
Yeah, it was a lot of one-rounders. So she was able to get the wins over Claire Lopez, over Crisaida Adames, and then Stephanie Frausta. In those matchups, though, good takedown defense, good clinch work, and holy smokes, is she a technical boxer for this division.
Very dynamic.
Doesn't really throw a lot of kicks. I was really, really, really impressed by what I saw out of both these women, but just to start with the fighter on the left with Yasmin Jauregui. I think that, you know, if she can keep up the really good takedown defense, if she can implement this boxing, I think she's going to be a talent at 23 in this division for a really long time.
I gotta be honest though, this is one of those great fights where the outcome doesn't really matter as much as you probably think, because for Jauregui and for Lucindo, they're both extremely young, not only in their careers, but in life as well. We were just talking about a 30-year-old heavyweight who has a lot of room to improve. We're talking about a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old fighter who both have great foundations to build upon. But for Jauregui right now, I agree with you 100%. Not only does she have great boxing, it's damaging boxing too. And I think that's very important because she's not someone who has to go out there, rely on the jab, rely on the right hand, and really set up her power shots. Her shots just have a natural damage to them. And I really do like that in this division because at strawweight, a lot of very technical strikers, but not a lot of knockout artists. Now, I'm not here to tell you that Jauregui is the next coming of Jessica Andrade, but I do really like what I've seen out of her on the regional scene, and I love how she can mix up her body attack with uppercuts too. Everyone knows how good Mike Tyson is, uppercut, left hook. Not like Jauregui's that. I can't even believe I mentioned them in the same video. But you can definitely see what her foundation is in her mixed martial arts. Like you had said, great foundational boxing. That's what you love to see out of a fighter who's 23 years old, because a lot of fighters at this age, they have that one area of their game that they're very good at, and then they have to improve upon a lot of others. Wrestling's just kind of a one-faceted game, if you will, where if you're good at wrestling, you really don't have to worry about the rest because you're so good at that. With Jauregui, I do feel like she can improve upon the other parts of her game, but her one sort of sword, if you will, that is very sharp, is so effective at this stage of her career that I really do think she can go out there and outstrike a lot of fighters in this division. Not in the top 15, of course. Like Marina Rodriguez would light this lady on fire, but Marina Rodriguez has been in the UFC for years now at this point, but I do feel like Jauregui is almost like an earlier version of Rodriguez. That's exactly what came to mind when I looked at her film.
Trains with somebody who's great in a lower weight class such as this. Silvana Gomez Juarez, La Malvada at Entram Gym. It's going to be iron sharpening iron. You have Johnny Munoz Jr. there and Yasmin Navarrete to round it out. But everybody in the room there, obviously having a champion in Brandon Moreno, was able to prop that gym up to high heights. You saw a lot of fighters out of Entram Gym on Contender Series and in the UFC last year. You're going to see even more this year. And I know Moreno's moved on to Glory MMA and Fitness, but if we look at it for Jauregui, I was watching one of the promos for her fight. At 14, she got into kickboxing because she was bullied in school. So like a GSP origin story. For Yasmin Lucindo, different origin story and not as good. It's unfortunate, but in 2021, Guilherme Cruz wrote an article on Lucindo. The title was MMA prospect Yasmin Lucindo turned pro at age 14 to defend mother aunts from domestic violence. And it's unfortunate and it's crazy. And for Lucindo, she's a main training partner of one, Matt's favorite fighter, Vina Jandiroba. So you do love to see that. But for Lucindo, I looked at this as, okay, she gets into MMA as, you know, a Muay Thai artist. And then I go watch her fights, having that knowledge in my head, and I thought, what the fuck? She's not a Muay Thai artist at all. She throws a really good right kick to the body, up kind of close to the shoulder of her opponents. She stands back and throws arm punches, and then she goes for the takedown. It's lights out. Like, she's wrapping the legs like Khabib up against the cage. I was really, really impressed by Lucindo with her groundwork, the way that she's able to flow through positions, multiple takedowns in fights. She doesn't really slow with her wrestling as the fight goes on. Her striking gets more labored for sure. But I really did like what I saw. And oh, by the way, she's only 20 years old too.
And that's my big issue with Lucindo. It's not necessarily about her game right now. It's her age and her experience factor at this level. Like, Song Yadong is one of the few fighters I can think of who came in when he was 20 years old. And we still know who he is right now. Like, you guys probably know who Sage Northcutt is. But you've never watched him fight in a UFC octagon.
My only, kind of zig to zag where you're going with this, she did beat old Sarah Froda down on the regional scene. I did like that. And her last win over Rhea, over with, what was it?
She looked good in her last one, I will give you.
And that was a fighter that had a win on Dana White's Contender Series as well.
But Sarah Flota's a fighter who missed weight in the UFC and did not look great at all. So I will agree with you. Lucinda did look good in her last matchup. I'm just going to be very curious to see where she has success in this fight, because I do think she's going to go out there and try to strike with Jauregui, especially close in this match, especially early on in this matchup. But I don't think it's going to work out for her at all. And I've read the same thing. It's about her Muay Thai background, about how credentialed of a striker she is, but she does not fight in that manner whatsoever. And for Lucinda, I really do think it's going to come down to Lucindo, sorry, I said duh. But for Lucindo, I just don't know how she's going to win on the margins, put it that way. It's like in baseball. In baseball, there's an escalating pay grade, so some teams only pay their players like $15 million a year, and then my favorite team, the Yankees, can spend like $1/3 billion on their lineup. For Lucindo, I like the foundation, the bare bones of her game, but again, how's she going to win on the margins? Because with her takedowns and her wrestling, I think it's good, but I don't think it's great enough to go out there and just get finishes. And I do believe she is going to have to work behind her striking, at least at a certain point in this matchup. And I just don't know if this is the best opponent for her to try to do that.
I think Lucindo has a ground advantage over, and it's going to be weird. I think she has a ground advantage at strawweight over a lot of different fighters. I think she's going to make it really interesting. And in this matchup, I think she has a distinct advantage because Yasmin Jauregui was getting ready for a fight against Estela Nunes. The fight was called off July 14th. Carlos Contreras-Legaspi tweeted that Lucindo is in on the matchup. So Jauregui already had a camp going for somebody who only strikes. Estela Nunes is a terrible grappler in this division defensively.
I would agree.
So it's striker versus striker. It's a fun fight. It's boxer versus kickboxer. It would have sold tickets, butts and seats at the Apex or Pachanga Resort and Casino outside of San Diego. But now in this matchup, you got to get ready for a grappler in Lucindo. Lucindo is already getting ready for a lot of different strikers.
Lucindo's
so I think
not Damian Maia, though.
No, but she's pretty damn good at this women's strawweight division, Matt.
I think at 20 she is going to struggle in the grappling department. Just because I say it doesn't mean I'm right, but I really do feel like her physicality and her experience at this level is going to do her a disservice. That's just me being honest.
Jauregui open a -260 favorite, -275 right now. If you look at it for Lucindo, open a +220. I guess rather, Jauregui open minus 260, minus 215. Lucindo has gained open plus 220, plus 175. So Matt, I do expect the fighter out of Mexico in Jauregui to be favored by the fans. I'm going to say over under 70% Jauregui.
I was thinking like 84, so...
Oh my god.
Way more.
610 total votes, 94% Jauregui, 80% by decision. For the 6% that have Lucindo, 74% by decision. Do you guys realize she's been fighting one-round fights and she hasn't fought in over a year?
I do think it will go to decision, though. I do agree with them on that.
I think Jauregui's going to get the win in this one, but I'm serious. If Yasmin Lucindo takes her down in the first round, she takes her down in the second round, the third round, she wins this fight. Like, I have this one lined as a 50-50 type of fight. I know we disagree on this. I think Lucindo has that type of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. If she decides to strike for strike's sake, she holds herself back and throws arm punches. You lose to Jauregui that way. Jauregui has that type of boxing, that bite down on the mouthpiece, move forward, throw in combination, back you up, punish you to the body, throw the uppercuts. Jauregui is that striker. She's very, very polished. Lucindo has great jiu-jitsu. I've seen good takedown defense from Jauregui. I haven't seen it in big-time 3-round fights, and level of competition for these women actually favors Lucindo over Jauregui. I do like Jauregui in this matchup. I'm eager to see this one. Surprised by the odds, surprised by the fan vote here.
Even if Lucindo out-grapples Jauregui, I'm still not going to be sold on her as a grappler at this level. That's just me being 100% transparent. I do think she can have success in the clinch, though. I do think the elbows are going to be really important. And just sort of the dirty boxing range in general, because Jauregui does like to have a lot of her success in that open cage. It's very clean when you look at her technique, whereas Lucindo, I do feel like she can excel on some of the in-betweens, but I do agree with you. I think for Jauregui, with her overall boxing, going to the body, going to the head, I do like her output, so ever so slightly going to favor her, but I'm curious to see overall just how long these ladies are in the UFC or what their overall ceilings can be.
Yeah, somebody is just beating the pavement, smashing their steering wheel. You guys talk 10 minutes about debuting women's strawweights. You need to know this information when you go to B-Dub-Dubs and you have all these facts, so you can thank the boys. But both of us going with Mexico's Yasmin Jauregui. I think this is a giant red flag fight, so stay away, watch it, pop popcorn, all that jazz. Should be a fun one, and we have a big-time bantamweight main event coming up. Marlon Vera, Dominic Cruz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. David Onama is 10-1 in his career with 10 finish wins, and he's looking to put a train on the bedroom poster when he takes on Nate Landwehr. It's like red panty night, but it's Nate Landwehr night for David Onama. And listen, I don't know if he has bedroom posters, but he will want to put that train on there. And this is an interesting matchup when it comes down to it, because for Nate Landwehr, his last time out, he has a win that doesn't age like milk. It ages like a fine wine when he took on Ludwig Klein in a fight where he was kind of struggling with the striking of Klein, and then later on, Klein initiates the takedown. Landwehr is able to buck it into his favorable position.
Who is he, Brogan Walker?
Yeah, he gets a submission win. It was kind of wild. So a big-time win for Landwehr, gets a performance bonus, and then you think the train's running on the tracks. Not off the tracks, it's on those tracks.
Like Alan Jackson? Wish it was a diesel locomotive.
Well, Matt, that fight was way back when. And I mean, the train's been derailed. That fight was 9 months ago, almost 10 months ago. He was booked to take on Lerone Murphy. See ya, you're gone. He was booked to take on Zubara Tukhugov about last week. See ya, Zubara can't make it. So, on short notice, David Onama takes the fight. Now, Onama was supposed to fight, about a month ago against Austin Lingo? Very similar matchup.
Very.
Lingo falls out, so he fights a former foe in a rematch of his amateur days in Garrett Armfield. And Armfield was training with the Lioness, Amanda Nunes. And Garrett Armfield was feeding his parents' goats in Missouri. And if you don't believe me, that's true. Armfield takes the fight. Onama wins the fight fairly handily. Now, when it comes down to this matchup, Matt, Nate Landwehr, Michael Bisping has said it many times before, don't brawl. But, I mean, the guy's 15-4 because he's brawled in the past. Like, that's how he wins. He was always brought in as, like, the big bad American to fight over with M1 Global. But he was a champ and he defended the belt and he looked pretty damn good doing it in front of those hometown guys. So, for Nate Landwehr, I wasn't sure what to expect coming into the UFC because he's been a guy that's been around. He fought Herbert Burns a very long time ago. 2 years and 5 months ago. Gets knocked out in that matchup. Beats Darren Elkins. Loses to Julian Erosa by knockout. Beats Ludwig Klein. But when I look at all of this, Matt, like, Nate Landwehr is an awkward guy because he has a really high stance but really wide legs. It's the oddest thing. Again, if you saw a silhouette of Nate Landwehr fighting, you probably know who that guy is.
I don't think I've ever recommended this to anybody ever, but if I talked to Nate Landwehr and he was like, Matt, what fighting advice would you give me? Again, a situation that's never going to happen ever. You know what I say? I give him a tape of Josh Koscheck in all of his fights, and I say, fight exactly like this man. Don't be exciting. Don't go for anything that we know you for. Don't become the train. Become the boring MFer who wrestles. Because that's the thing about Nate Landwehr.
Oh, caboose Landwehr.
His aggression is phenomenal, and it does get him caught in some fights, but that's the problem with Nate Landwehr. If you watch some of his fights where everything's going well, it's kind of like what I always say about with my boy, Michael Olashaychuk. I can sell you a package of Olashaychuk where you're like, damn, this guy fights in the top 5. Like, when's he fighting Yuri Prohashka? I can also, sell you a package of him where you're like, so he barely throws any punches and he has porous takedown defense and bad submission defense.
But he beats guys when he's a minus 600 favorite.
Well, just like both of those things can be true. It's like when I talked about Amanda Nunes quitting in the first Juliana Pena fight, and you had said, oh, well, she's the greatest ever. You're right. But both of those statements can be true. And for Nate Landwehr, his aggression is a very big factor in his fights, but I don't know if it's a positive factor or a negative factor at this level, because outside the UFC, you can be very aggressive and you can get away with some of those mistakes. But against a guy like David Onama, who can strike not only moving forward, but can strike moving backwards too, I do worry about Nate Landwehr and just his entries with his takedown defense, or not with his takedown defense, with his takedown attempts. And this is sort of the wrinkle that I think Nate Landwehr is going to really have to use to have success in this matchup. Don't go for takedowns in open space. Clinch and then go for your takedowns, because if Landwehr does try to go for some of those long distance takedowns, I think that's how Onama could time him, maybe catch him with a shot in the in-between, whereas from the clinch, I do feel like Landwehr can make it more of a progressive wrestling approach to where he can sort of chain wrestle a little bit better, and I think that's an area where he could have a lot of success.
David Onama, to me, does struggle against the takedowns in open space. You didn't just have to see that in the Mason Jones fight. The fight against Justin Overton, he struggled there until late in the fight. He just kind of cinched up a guillotine against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So Onama's done it before. My big knock on him is the takedown defense, and Onama will go tit for tat, strike for strike. He got caught against Gabriel Benitez. He was kind of wiping it off. He beats Garrett Armfield. He gets caught against Mason Jones. Mason Jones, don't take fights on short notice, bud. But when you look at it for Nate Landwehr,
across the world,
the weirdest stat that I have for him is the fact that he was a favorite against Julian Erosa and Herbert Burns. The fights that he lost in, he's an underdog in the 2 fights that he's won in the UFC. So in this fight, he is an underdog. Open a plus 250, plus 175 right now for David Onama. Open minus 300, minus 215. We have a look at the Tapology votes in this one, Matt. I would assume that it's going to be, I'm going to say over under 75%. And personally, I'm going to say it's probably over. I don't think I said it high enough.
David Onama? Oh, I agree. I think it'll be over.
Think it's going to be over? Holy smokes.
I'm surprised seeing them that far apart, though.
659 total votes, 89% Onama, 80% by knockout for the 11% that have Landwehr, 49% by decision, 26% by knockout. Nate Landwehr trains at MMA Masters with Daniel Valverde. Guy who knows judo and jiu-jitsu. That is his specialty. And he's able to work with these athletes and really accentuate that stat. Now, obviously, you have Colby Covington at the gym now, Danny Chavez. The list goes on and on of the people that have trained at MMA Masters.
Really grown in front of our eyes, hasn't it?
They really have. And I think Daniel Valverde is a great coach that you don't hear enough about. So on Fight Night Picks, you get to hear about him. Obviously, Onama comes from that now championship pedigree. Glory MMA and Fitness, James Krause, Brandon Moreno. The list goes on and on. Nate Landwehr has a decent opportunity in this fight. I think if they brawl, Landwehr's got I wouldn't say a 50-50
Landwehr's
shot.
going down, I think, if they brawl.
He's got a good shot. If he wrestles, he also has a good shot in this matchup. I think Onama has the hand speed and the power, and that's why I pick him in this matchup. He's a tricky guy to figure out on the feet, and man, when he starts to blitz, it's usually good night. So I do like Onama. Obviously, Landwehr, can do a lot of things, but if he comes out like he did in his last fight against Ludwig Klein, high, wide stance, body's wide open, David Onama throws a lot of shots to the body, whether it's straight shot, looping hook, or he throws the kicks to the body. I think that's the biggest difference maker for Onama in this matchup.
If they brawl, I think David Onama knocks him out in under 5. 5 minutes, not 5 rounds. I do not think
5 seconds.
I just don't think Nate Landwehr's style is going to be very conducive to him brawling in a matchup like this, because David Onama has fought lightweights and can deal with their power. And that's the thing. David Onama's been as big as a fighter in this division can be. And I always thought he would be big after he moved down against Mason Jones, but still, you never really had a great grasp awesome until he fought a guy like Gabriel Benitez, who, again, he's one of those weird tweeners between lightweight and featherweight, but still, the fact that David Onama towered over him and looked multiple weight classes bigger gives me a little bit more confidence in this fight against Nate Landwehr. I do think that's going to help his overall takedown defense, and I do think that his striking on the outside is enough of an X factor to win those moments in the minutes that we talk about, the things that really do stand out in the judge's mind. I think this is a fun fight between two guys who definitely deserve more shine than they get, and I kind of like that for the co-main event. Like, the great thing about being one of the 4 fighters in the main event or co-main event is you're featured media day on Wednesday. You get interviewed by everybody. They give you
everybody on the main card gets this treatment.
But co-main and main get even more. Like, they get sort of that superstar treatment, if you will, by the media. And that's really important for guys like Nate Landwehr and David Onama, who, let's be honest, they're not like these crazy outspoken fighters. Nate Landwehr, I guess, a little bit. He gets pretty fired up after his fights. But still, these aren't guys who are going to go out there and sell thousands of tickets with their talking. They really do rely on their fighting style. And I think this is a great opportunity for both of these guys to showcase their fighting styles. But I still do like David Onama. But I'll just say quickly what I said earlier on in the video. David Onama, to me, is a very exciting fighter, a very talented fighter, but I need to see slightly more if I think he will become a ranked fighter in this division, so hopefully we can just see a few more wrinkles of his game in this fight.
Both of us going with Uganda's the silent assassin, Vicente Luque. David Onama to get the win. Coming up this weekend, can't wait for the fight. The main event, Marlon Vera taking on the Dominator, Cruz, the former WEC and UFC great at bantamweight. It should be an awesome fight. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
Big time main event coming up this weekend. We have one of the all-time greatest bantamweight fighters, the Dominator, Dominick Cruz, WEC champ, UFC champ, legend, commentator, and a guy who had his way with his words against Cody Garbrandt. He's taking on Chito Marlon Vera, a guy who's absolutely on an incredible roll. And if you look at it for Vera, win over Davey Grant, win over Frankie Edgar, win over Rob Font, looking to put another great on the mantelpiece is Chito Vera, a guy who's really coming into his own. I mean, a guy who, I don't know, I could say, I haven't dusted off the record collection in a while, but why don't we do it, Matt? I mean, this is something that the Fight Night Picks fans, they absolutely love. Like 1983's Huey Lewis and the New Sport.
What about it?
I mean, listen, you do look at that album and you look at a couple of different movies and you have a little bit of fun. And while their early work was a little bit too new wave for me, they really settled into their own. And that's how I look at Marlon Vera. I mean, this is a guy that came into the UFC at a very, very young age, off the Ultimate Fighter. And if you look at the progression that he's been able to make, I mentioned that Davey Grant fight that he had, his third to last fight. Did he beat Davey Grant the first time he fought him? No, he didn't. So he had to really kind of grind his teeth, fight on the undercards, fight in some big opportunities, and obviously he does go out there, he beats Sean O'Malley, he fights Jose Aldo, he loses that fight.
Fought John Lineker before that, though.
I know, I understand that, but his big launch board, his big springboard for a lot of the fans was that Sean O'Malley fight. For the hardcores, John Lineker fights, so on and so forth. Marlon Vera's been around for a really long time. Andre Ewell's another big win that he had. Frankie Saenz, Guido Canetti, Luigi Beren, who we never see anymore. But when we do look at Marlon Vera, I think it is right to say, this guy's really coming into his own at 29, and he's a giant opportunity in another main event slot to beat another legend, to possibly prop himself up into title contention.
He definitely does. That's the great thing about Marlon Vera. The only reason I brought up the John Lineker fight was because if you have been watching Marlon Vera, he's had multiple promotional pushes to where not all of them have really paid off, but he has been able to rebuild himself and be really good, because that's the thing, even if you're a casual fan, you knew who Marlon Vera was before he fought Douglas Silva de Andrade, before he fought John Lineker. He was an extremely pushed fighter before he had those 2 losses. The problem was, when you lose to 2 guys, well, one guy, John Lineker, being one of the best fighters in the division, didn't put up much of a fight, and that one was on the defensive a lot and ate a lot of body shots against Lineker. And then he had a bit of a stale performance against Andrade, so a lot of people were left kind of wondering, okay, where does this guy fit in the whole division? But in the back of my mind, I was like, damn, I hope Marlon Vera goes on a run, because I really liked what I had seen out of him in his earlier run in the UFC, and you can see sort of the bare bones of his game and how they've evolved over time. He was someone who really had to use his Muay Thai, really had to use his kicks. Even think of the Brad Pickett fight. Like, Brad Pickett was up 2 rounds to nothing on Marlon Vera.
Like Chuck Mindenhall.
But the difference was Brad Pickett just got head kicked in the third round, and Marlon Vera felt terrible about it. It's a weird fight to watch. Marlon Vera hits him with a head kick and does like the whole Lyoto Machida bow and like cries afterwards because he felt bad. My point being is that Marlon Vera has been that guy for a very long time. Basically, like the famous Steve Jobs quote is, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to iterate as fast as possible." And for Marlon Vera, he kind of exemplifies that. You don't have to be perfect. Just fix yourself over time. Be a little bit different over time, and that's what I really liked out of Vera, especially on this run. Even look back at the Frankie Edgar fight. I think we both may have had Frankie Edgar. I know for a fact I thought Frankie Edgar was going to beat Marlon Vera.
No, you had Marlon Vera and I had Frankie Edgar, and I thought Frankie Edgar looked all right until the third round.
I had Frankie Edgar, so we must have both had him in that fight, because I also thought Frankie Edgar looked really good. But the thing is, Marlon Vera doesn't look like he hits hard, but I'm here to tell you right now he hits pretty darn hard at this division, and that's always kind of been the weird thing about Vera. He is a volume-oriented striker. I would probably put him into that pool, but he's not someone you can mess around with, even with the one strikes here or there, because Rob Font's... Is Rob Font in his prime anymore? I would say in golf terms, he's probably on like the 15th, 16th hole. Like, he's been in a lot of tough fights at this stage of his career. A little bit older in his career too. But when that fight got past the second round and Rob Font started to teeter off even a little bit with his output, Marlon Vera smelt blood like a great white in the water. It was impressive stuff to see Vera completely turn up the pace on him and really not let him go once he was able to turn the pace up. And the thing that I've watched a lot in Dominic Cruz, especially his last few fights, have been, hey, he looks really good to start out, gets a really big lead on his opponent, and then he'll just kind of coast, if you will.
And you would give me flack. I mean,
because you didn't say it the right way one time.
Shut the fuck up. I watched a lot of tape on Dominic Cruz. If you watch him in the first round, it's the same damn thing every first round. Figure eight, pitter patter, let's get at her, Leonard Kenny, and he's landing a lot of volume. Second round, slows down with the feet, picks up the volume. Third round, he's already picked you apart. He just continues to do more of the same.
But we've seen Dominic Cruz in a lot of 5-round fights, and in round 4 and 5, he relies a lot on his wrestling and a lot on his footwork again. So I don't think it's a matter of him getting tired in fights. He just fights in a different manner.
And we've seen him in these 3-round fights. I mean, Casey Kenny fight, wins by split decision, beats Pedro Munoz his last time out. I mean, hell, Pedro nearly finished him. I mean, Dominic Cruz was given every opportunity to get back into that fight because they didn't want a redo of Keith Peterson V1. So Cruz gets the opportunity, rallies back, and then he's able to mount that volume and do his thing. And when you watch these Dominic Cruz fights, he was known for so long as Dominic Cruz the wrestler. Dominic Cruz the volume guy. And if you look at it, gotten away from the wrestling a little bit as his career has progressed. But when you look at it in a fight like this for Cruz, if I'm Cruz, I look at that fight that Jose Aldo had against Marlon Vera and go, geez, maybe I dust off those wrestling shoes.
I don't think he can recreate that at all at this stage of his career. The problem with Dominic Cruz is, I think the lack of wrestling has more come down to his opponents and not the fact that he can't do it anymore. Like, what are you going to gain in wrestling Casey Kenny? A lot of 50-50 exchanges where you both got tired from it? What are you going to gain from grappling Pedro Munoz? You're way faster than him on the feet. He's one of the most deadly jiu-jitsu aces in the division. Like, if there were any two fighters, or Dominic Cruz, I want to call him DC so much, but any two fights that Dominic Cruz wouldn't wrestle in, it would probably be the last two opponents. I do expect him to wrestle a lot more in this matchup, but the problem is, Cruz has these very unique wrestling entries where he does rely on sort of that half-moon movement to then enter into his wrestling just entries. And the problem is, Dominic Cruz does really rely on his opponents tiring down in fights for him to then pick off. It's like, I've never run a marathon. I used to do cross-country when I was younger. But what they always told me when I was in middle school, early high school was, hey, if you meet a guy when you're running, sprint past him as fast as you can. Don't give them a single second in their mind to think they can catch you once they catch up to you. And that's what Dominic Cruz does. The second he gets an inch on you, he takes a mile. But the issue is, against a guy like Casey Kenny, who tired against Nathaniel Wood, you can do stuff like that. Pedro Munoz is 40,000 years old in MMA years, and he's almost 40 in the bantamweight division.
Kid got eye poked.
He does.
The young Punisher.
He did get eye poked. But the thing is, Pedro Munoz is someone who's as cold as molasses on a winter's day, and you knew that Dominic Cruz would be able to outspeed him if he didn't get knocked out, which is basically exactly what happened. Marlon Vera is as fast as a fighter can be at this weight division. He's not somebody who waits a lot for his opponent to really get started before he starts his own attack. And I don't think Vera's the type of fighter who's going to drop off a cliff at a certain point in this fight. And that's why I do think the output of Marlon Vera is such an X factor.
Yeah, I love the output of Marlon Vera. The one thing that I don't love is there's times where he gets taken down and he can think of himself as a Swiss Army knife off his back. And he is good with his submissions off his back. But you can't play off your back against Dominic Cruz. I mean, Cruz is definitely going to be more of a position over submission over finish type of fighter.
Dillashaw fight.
Exactly. We do know this out of Dominic Cruz. The blueprint is there. But for Marlon Vera, he can spend long amounts of time off his back and not work to get back up because he's so confident in his ground game. The other thing about Dominic Cruz and his takedowns, he is obviously very unique on his entries. You hit it about the half beat thing. And the thing that I found interesting doing my tape study for this card was the fact that I can't remember for the life of me the fight I was watching. It might have been, I want to say it was Clark against William Knight, and Dominic Cruz said, oh, geez, he made a big mistake right there on his wrestling entry. He went same side with both things, head on one side.
Need that way.
Went head on one side, right side attack, this and that. And if you look at it, I mean, I think back to, you play rugby, all same side, head tucked in, this and that. Well, I'm not going to get guillotined playing rugby, so I don't have to worry about it. But of course, in MMA, you do. When you watch Dominic Cruz with his entries, they are so tricky, but you always do worry about the kicks of Marlon Vera, the knees of Marlon Vera, the submissions of Marlon Vera on those attempts, especially as the fight goes on. Because if we've seen anything from Marlon Vera, the thing that he proved to me in the Rob Font fight was, well, guy's not going away round 4, round 5. He's still there for these fights, still throwing with volume, still throwing with power. So I am really eager to see this. The other thing I want to say, this Dominic Cruz, slowing down. The Casey Kenny fight, maybe in the 3rd round. The fight against Pedro Munoz, 3-round fight again. So we get an opportunity to see an all-timer at bantamweight in a situation where he's very familiar with these 5-round fights, of course. But I look at it, Matt, I'm going to throw it on over to the YouTube community tab because you folks get your chance, get your say, get your day in the sun. Yes, Matt?
I just want to say one last thing about Dominic Cruz and his overall career. He's 37 years old, but he has had a lot of time off due to injuries. You can look at that in 2 different ways. He hasn't taken a lot of hits to the head, which is pretty good if you're 37 years old, but the mobility has been lacking as of late. I have a friend named Leah who just got her ACL repaired yesterday, so shout out Leah, hopefully you're doing better, but it does affect you. She told me before she got the surgery done that when it was cold, she could, feel her knee ache. Now, she's not a world-class athlete, but my point is, for Dominic Cruz to be at 37 years old, in a division that we normally worry about guys when they're 37 years old, I really do worry about him finally facing a top-tier contender after all this time off, because for Cruz, you can beat Kenny, you can beat Pedro Munoz, but neither one of those guys were seen at the points when he fought them as future title challengers. I think there's a very real world where Marlon Vera can beat Dominic Cruz, maybe fights the winner of, isn't Song Yadong fighting Corey Sandhagen?
Yeah.
Perhaps fights the winner of that matchup, and let's be honest, Marlon Vera could win that fight. He had a close fight with Song Yadong. That'll be a good fight. There's a world where Marlon Vera could fight for a title, and I never once saw Casey Kenny or the Pedro Munoz who fought Dominic Cruz in that light.
I did Fundy National Park today. Took a trail I had no business being on that was all uphill incline. It was ridiculous. The point I'm getting at
You're
is,
like Dominic Cruz.
3 years ago, I tore my knee up, and motherfucker, it fucking hurt quite
What
badly.
did you tear, though?
Everything. You bend it backwards. My knee now, 2-3 times a week, bends backwards on its own, just taking a misstep. So it's just bad stuff altogether. But Matt, we threw it out there in the YouTube community tab. 1,000 total votes, 67% taking Marlon Vera to get the win, the 33% taking Dominic Cruz. I read your comments. A lot of mean things said about Dominic Cruz. So Bill is saying, I have to pick Cheeto in this one. Cruz is going to look better technically, but I think Vera's going to have bigger moments. When he does land, it's hard to tell if Cruz is still at championship level at this point in his career. Derek saying, Dominic Cruz only lost in title fights. I have Cruz outworking Vera over 5 rounds. Good point there. First Last saying, Cruz is extremely patient, and in a 5-round fight, I can see him frustrating Vera with his pace and his movement. Regardless of Cheeto hurting him badly, I see Cruz potentially reading the defensive lull of Vera that Marlon uses to explode and counter to set up awkward combos and takedowns against Cheeto. Gas, I don't know, man. I can see Cruz being clever and outpointing Vera. Pretty sure he watched Vera Font and has learned a lot from that. And I'll go with one more.
What did he learn? Don't get hit at all for 25 minutes or it's going to be bad?
Orthodox saying Cruz better fight better than he commentates. LOL. And Forward Moving saying Cruz is too old and slow to hang with Cheeto. His chin can't take the power either. Forward says very mean things in the comment section every week. Forward, just do the damn thing, Matt. Topology, very similar. 72% of the fans going with Vera. We have more votes in the community tab. The odds in this one, Vera open to -155, -208. Cruz open +135, +170 now. So Matt, the fans have Vera. The odds suggest Vera is the pick Vera.
Dominic Cruz got dropped by a jab against a 40-year-old.
Yeah, I can't forget about that one.
Exactly. And I know that's a blanket statement to where it's hey, it's Pedro Munoz. He's a good fighter. He has good power. But Marlon Vera does not get tired in 5-round fights. There's a lot of evidence to point to that, too. If anything, he gets stronger in 5-round fights. And with Dominic Cruz, if the going's rough for him early on, I don't think he is going to be able to use his veteran guile to get through that in this matchup.
They did against Munoz. but he was given every opportunity.
And Pedro could be Marlon Vera's dad. He's that much older than him. Like, Marlon Vera right now is in his prime. Dominic Cruz hasn't really fought
Imagine a night out with Cheeto and the Young Punisher. Just a dangerous crew.
Dominic Cruz has not fought a top contender in their prime since Cody Garbrandt. That was UFC 207. That was a long time ago, guys. Like, he's not the same fighter he used to be. We used to talk about Cynthia Calvillo as a potential top contender all the way back then, too. And Cynthia Calvillo is not really known as, like, a top-tier fighter. I know Dominic Cruz was on such a high pedestal that, hey, even if you get knocked down from being MVP, you're still an all-star. And that's how I look at Dominic Cruz. But Marlon Vera, to me, is like Jimmy Butler, to put into basketball references. He might not be as best as the absolute top tier, but he's going to make it grimy. He's going to make it tough. Anybody who's not of that upper echelon anymore is probably going to get beat by him, and that's why I like Marlon Vera.
Yeah, I like Marlon Vera. Again, it really is the combination of skills when you look at this matchup. A guy who does gain as those 5 rounds progress. And for Dominic Cruz, you get past the volume and the pitter-patter. We'll have to see how Vera's able to wear or at least deal with the threat of the wrestling, because against Jose Aldo, that was such a big-time issue. Now, that was a 3-round fight. This is a 5-round fight, so we'll see how it plays out. But that is always a question mark in the back of my mind. Jose Aldo's not somebody that's utilized wrestling, you know, especially on the large rise.
Never.
It's the knockouts, this and that. Lately, it's been the wrestling. But that's the thing. It really was a surprise for me to see Vera in those compromised positions where he was just kind of helpless for minutes on end.
So last weekend we had said that, hey, if Terrence McKinney wins, I would expect a Paddy Pimblett call out. And guess what, Craig?
Yeah, look at that.
Guess who we called out right after? Do you think, I sort of set it up, do you think the winner of this will fight the winner of Corey Sandhagen and Song Yadong? I feel like Song Yadong and Marlon Vera, of course, have the history. They had a very close fight the first time around. Marlon Vera was all angry he didn't get the decision. But the fact that both guys have been able to work their way to the top of the division, I think would make a very compelling fight and a very fun title eliminator for them. So do you think that that is the probable matchup for both?
Or you go the winner, Piotr Jan and Sean O'Malley, and then you rematch Vera with O'Malley if they happen to win, you know, because that one's contentious. But there's a lot of moving pieces, obviously, at the top half of the bantamweight division. A lot of fights that are already booked. A lot of fighters that, well, they don't have to wait and look in. So in this one, both of us going with Marlon Vera to get the win. We have Dana White's Contender Series breakdowns, previews here on the channel. One pick a piece. It's a totally different show than anything that you're used to. We get the opportunity to just hop in through that chat. We went live on Sunday night a little bit earlier. It's probably going to be another Sunday night next week. I know it is. And we have some big time fights coming up this weekend. Question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. If anything funky happens on Friday or throughout the week, we get the opportunity to have hindsight in the rearview mirror and possibly change some of those picks. That is the show 2 hours before the prelims. Matt, some big time fights coming up this week.
I'm really excited for this card. I know we talk about often about
I think
how
we talked ourselves into it.
But exactly, there's normally a lot of cards where you're like, hey, the only ranked opponents or the only ranked fighters in the main event, co-main event, and that happens to be the case this weekend other than Angela Hill. But still, for the most part, this is a very top-heavy card, but I do feel like we've been able to dig deep enough to really find some intriguing matchups on this card.
Should be a lot of fun. I hope you certainly enjoyed the show. The likes, the super chats, the subs every week. We wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for you, so thank you so much for your support. I really mean that. Everybody says it. I mean it. Trust me. But
you guys are the best community out there. It's not even close.
It really is. That comment section is popping every single week. So listen, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say,
let's get into it.